he drank his water loudly and burped, I finally snapped. It felt like I had reached the end of my patience. My nerves were frayed, and I was done. I shouted, "I want a divorce!" There was complete silence. I couldn't believe I actually said it, and he was shocked as if nothing was wrong in his perfect world. He just stared at me, the glass of water still in his hand. "What?" he stammered, that familiar quiver in his voice showing his surprise. Well, I had said it. No turning back now. I took a breath and let it all out. "Yes. You must have noticed how upset I've been for the last 6 months. Even in your little world, you must have realized I'm ready to leave." "Well, I thought—" His voice trailed off, and I waited, eager to hear what he had to say. "I thought. You're in your late 40s, I thought. Menopause." He almost whispered that last word. I was speechless. Did he really think that was my problem? I started to feel better about what I had yelled at him. He deserved it. "I'm 46. I can have kids for a long time. What about you? When was the last time you were even interested?" I shot back. He looked shocked. I thought, when we used those, it was what? Amazing. You just roll over and start snoring after. Do you think you're some kind of romance expert? I knew I was being a bit harsh. There were times when things were great, but I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Those moments were rare lately, and honestly, I hadn't really tried much either. There's a limit to how many half-hearted efforts you can make. And the snoring. That was just another reason I wanted a divorce. After we finished, instead of cuddling, he would just roll over and begin snoring. It was irritating. So I would get up, pour myself a glass of wine, and watch a show to unwind. I often wondered if other women had to deal with a snoring husband for 17 years. I bet they didn't. That's not a story with a tidy ending, no matter how real it might be. Honestly, what I really wanted was a smoke. We used to have those carefree days, but once the kids came along, no way. "Not in the house," said St. Jeff. Once the kids were here, it felt like all the fun disappeared. No more Saturday nights out, having a blast. No more laid-back get-togethers. Those were the best. At least that's what I remember. The truth is, I was unhappy with my life. I was unhappy with the man I married who hadn't really accomplished much. Sure, the kids adored him, but what kids wouldn't? He worked making toys, for heaven's sake. Toys. He even went to college for that. Can you believe it? He has a master's degree in child psychology. Good luck explaining that to my friends. You can't just casually drop that in when everyone else is talking about their husbands. I usually say, vaguely, "Oh, he has a degree in psychology and uses it at work." Then quickly change the subject. It makes him sound a bit mysterious, thank goodness, and saves me from details which I would rather avoid. I mean, who would want to admit that he makes toys for toddlers? Sure, I knew this when I married him. I just thought he'd be doing more important things, like creating educational programs to help kids learn better, not advising shows like Little Einsteins. Seriously? How do I make that sound like a great job for my husband? Melissa, my best friend from Maka Realty, where I work, has a husband who is a NASCAR mechanic. Now that's something to be proud of. Cindy's husband designs buildings that can withstand earthquakes. Joni is married to a judge. Okay, it's traffic court, but still, he's a judge. I don't want you to think I'm all about appearances, though. I know how important it is to enjoy what you do, to find joy in life. I get it. Selling and leasing commercial real estate isn't where I expected to be at this stage, either. Honestly, I'm not sure where I thought I would be, but feeling frustrated and tired of my husband and our marriage, that wasn't it at all. The thing is, I could tell you all the little things that bother me about him. There's no single huge problem. He's not abusive or neglectful. It's more like 1,000 tiny annoyances. He snores, he burps, he has moments that make it hard to enjoy. I know he struggles with stomach issues. I hear that every time he has an accident in public, but honestly, that only gets me so far. I know it's not his fault, but there comes a time when he makes a silly noise during an important part of a movie, and all my friends start laughing. It's more than I can handle. His driving really scares me. I worry about the kids in his car. He drives a Mustang like it's a rocket. Often he gets to places before he even leaves, and he has the speeding tickets to show for it. He dislikes coffee. Seriously, who dislikes coffee? What did I do to deserve a husband who doesn't like coffee? He drinks strange beers and looks down on the brands I prefer, like Pabst Blue Ribbon or Budweiser, whenever beer is on the menu. He constantly cleans his ears. He can burp many sounds, which the kids think is hilarious. He even sings along with popular songs that kids like. Even our kids find it embarrassing, especially when he drops them off at school. Maisie, who is 16, is really embarrassed by this. I know the right way to drop her off. Find a parking spot, say nothing while she gets out, and drive away quickly. Parents should be invisible at that age. I understand that. But he insists on getting out of the car, giving her a hug, and waving to her friends who he can never remember. It's so frustrating. And the bike racing he does on weekends with Drew, our 14-year-old son. It seems like they try to get as muddy as possible. I swear they go out to the desert just to get dirty and come back to our clean home with all that mess. He uses my eyebrow tweezers for his nose hairs. He never puts the toilet seat down, and when he uses the bathroom, it looks and smells awful. He wants to be close at the most awkward times. He says it's when the mood strikes him, but the mood never seems to strike me at the right time. It always happens right when I'm about to go out, right when I'm done with my makeup. He'll come over and start getting too close, and I'm like, "Come on, we'll be late." He never does the laundry, and when he loads the dishwasher, it's such a mess that nothing gets cleaned. Paying bills on time? He doesn't remember that either. I used to leave it to him, but after the electricity was cut off a few times, I took over. I'm telling you all of this so you can understand my life. I sell and lease commercial real estate for a living. It's a good job, and I earn more than Jeff does, which he doesn't seem to appreciate. I consider myself smart. Well, I believe I am, especially compared to many of the people I have to deal with in my work. My mom and dad are gone now, and honestly, I'm okay with that. My mom never really liked me. Whenever I did something smart or helpful, usually for one of my friends, she would just shake her head and say, "You're too smart for your own good." It really bothered me. I mean, who wants to hear their own mother call them foolish? My older sister Tina would just give me a smug smile and go back to her own stuff. Tina was the only one who understood me a bit. Having to explain TV shows to your parents is humiliating. Did they really not get it? But Tina was the typical big sister you always envy. Everything she did was amazing. "Why can't you be more like your big sister?" Mom would say, while Tina smirked behind her. Tina, she was smarter than me. She studied political science and worked on campaigns for senators. Need help getting elected? Call Tina. Need someone to twist the truth? Call Tina. Want to feel like you don't know anything? Call Tina. Well, that last one just applied to me, but still. I loved her from a distance, but found her super frustrating in person because she could cut straight to the point in a way that left me speechless. We hadn't seen each other in years. She moved to Washington, married a rich guy, and was now taking a break sailing around the world on their big yacht. She wrote textbooks and lectured at fancy universities, living a dream life. It was hard to reach her since she was always at sea. I kept waiting for her to invite us over, but it didn't happen, and I wasn't about to ask her. We lived in a suburb of Seattle, and things were going well for our business. We recently landed a big contract to sell a new building in downtown Seattle, which was a huge deal. Companies like Amazon and Google wanted office space, and we had to show it whenever they wanted. My friend Melissa, who I mentioned, had recently gone through a divorce. At first she was really sad, but after a few months, she found her rhythm. We all loved hearing her entertaining weekend stories on Mondays. She seemed to often fly to Las Vegas, and she'd start her tales with, "So there I was, and he had some wild things with him." I know she was quoting someone, but when she told it, her version was always lively and full of excitement. She looked happy, you know? I just wished I could feel the same. I really needed a break. I needed to figure out who I was because I couldn't remember anymore. Living with my husband, who acted more like a child, and taking care of our 2 kids on top of that, wasn't what I thought my life would be like. I know I have my own issues. For instance, I really don't like Prius drivers. I understand that the car is meant to help the environment, but here, it feels like some people use it to show off. It's like they're shouting, "Look at me! I care more about the planet than you do." There's a term for it, people trying too hard to show how much they care. When I see a Prius, I just feel frustrated. And trust me, I see plenty of them around here. So, yes, I have my problems, but I feel like I'm more in touch with reality than Jeff is. The thing is, even though I was upset, I had to believe Jeff felt the same way. He was making an effort to reach out to me. The problem was that he was using very simple strategies. He used methods that work with kids, not a woman who is probably smarter than him. When he tried, it made me angry because he wasn't approaching me in a meaningful way. It also made me sad to see how far apart we had grown. He noticed the distance between us and tried to close it, but his methods only made it worse. In that moment, I had already said what I felt, and I couldn't take it back. I looked at him and saw the hurt on his face. Good. Now he understood what I felt every time I had to look at him. I just wanted out. This wasn't how I wanted to do it, but when the moment came, I was determined to stand my ground. If this was the way it had to be, then so be it. Making this change was the only way I could see my life getting better, and I was pretty sure it would benefit him too. Who could be happy in this situation? Then, I took a deep breath. I was angry and he was hurt, so I needed to calm things down. Look, I said steadily. I'm not happy. I really am not happy. I'm pretty sure you aren't either. This isn't working. This is not the life I wanted. I just can't handle this anymore. I need to get out. As I spoke the last part, I felt like crying. Jeff immediately stood up and came towards me, not understanding what I was trying to say. He reached out to hug me, missing the point that it was him I was tired of. No, I said, raising my hand to stop him. No, just sit. He looked confused and sad, almost like a puppy. I had hurt him with my words, and still he just wanted to hug me. What kind of man is this? Jeff, I'm serious, I said as calmly as I could while looking him in the eyes as he sat back down. I want a divorce. I need my own life back. I understand, he said, unsteady. Well, I can't stop you, and I wouldn't want to. We all have to find our own way in life. That kind of wishy-washy talk was typical of him. After 18 years of hearing it, I couldn't take any more. Holding back my frustration, I was ready to respond when he added, I had hoped we could travel the same path, but obviously not. I can't handle another saying like that, Jeff. I just can't. Find our own way in life? I made air quotes and pretended to gag. Can you hear yourself? Really? He looked at me and I noticed his expression change. He had a way of pulling back emotionally during hard times. I had seen it a few times in our marriage, when his mother passed away, when his best friend died, when we lost our first child after a car accident where I made a mistake and lied about it, and when our kids were around when someone else got hurt. They weren't involved in it, but they didn't stop it, and Jeff was angry for days. When the police came, I thought he might explode, but instead, he went quiet and stayed that way for a long time. He had a way of turning off his feelings. I didn't know if he did it to protect himself or to keep from losing control. Either way, it was clear then. I should have seen it coming. What do you want to happen now, January? Not Jan anymore, it was January now. He used my full name and he knew I didn't like it. I guess I brought that on myself. I don't know. I really didn't. I had thought a divorce was coming, and now that it was happening, I realized how unhappy I was and how I needed to leave. I considered my options. I could move out or he could. We bought this house together after we got married, and we were almost done paying for it. I liked it, and so did he. I was unsure about how it should go. I knew that whoever kept the house would likely have more time with the kids, and that made things tough. I loved my children. They were my world. But part of this was about reclaiming my life. I felt trapped in my current situation, and I wanted a taste of my old life back. Shared custody would be okay with me. Despite his shortcomings as a husband, Jeff was a good father, and I believed he'd agree that I was a good mother too. Shared custody would give us both a break, and it was as much a gift for Jeff as it was for me. The house was nice, but it held memories I didn't want, so I had been looking for a while. I was a commercial real estate agent, and I'd heard about several new places. There was a 3-bedroom apartment in a new development in downtown Bellevue that I liked. It would be perfect for me, and I could lease it for a couple of years and maybe buy it later. In many ways, this was a better plan. I had more means than Jeff did, and even though I was frustrated with him, kicking him out and keeping the house would likely mean paying a lot of support, which I didn't want. I wasn't going to be cruel. Jeff dropped his plate on the table, and I flinched. When he drank his water and then burped loudly, I reached my breaking point. I lost control. I felt so overwhelmed my nerves were on edge. I yelled, "I want a divorce!" There was a moment of silence. I couldn't believe I finally said the thing that had been on my mind for months, and Jeff was shocked, not expecting any problems in his world. He just stared at me, the glass of water still in his hand. "What?" he stammered, his voice trembling as it often did when he was caught off guard. Well, I had said it. It was out in the open now. Yes, I do. Jeff, you can't be that unaware of how upset I've been these past months. Surely you must sense that I'm ready to go? Well, yeah, I just thought. His words faded. I was curious where this was heading. Thought what? Well, he shifted nervously. I thought, you are in your late 40s. I thought, maybe it's menopause? He almost whispered the last word. I sat there, shocked. He actually thought that? I started feeling better about my outburst. He deserved to hear this. I'm 46, I said firmly. I can still have kids for years, unlike you. When was the last time you felt confident? I couldn't hold back. He seemed taken aback. I thought, when we tried those, it was what? Amazing? Lasting? You often just turn over and start snoring. Do you think you're a great partner? Casanova? I wasn't being completely fair. There were times when he still surprised me, but I wouldn't let him know that. Those moments were rare, almost as surprising as finding something impossible. Honestly, I didn't often spark any excitement, nor did I really take part beyond just being there. I mean, how many times can you try something without much enthusiasm? He did snore, which added to my frustration. After we finished, instead of cuddling, he would just start snorting and snoring. It was enough to make anyone frustrated, so I would get up and have a glass of wine to calm myself, watch an episode of a show about friendships, and wonder if any of those women ever had to deal with a snoring husband for 17 years. I was pretty sure they hadn't. Real life doesn't wrap up neatly in 30 minutes like TV shows. To be honest, what I really wanted was a way to relax. We used to enjoy that back in the day, but once the kids came, not in our house, according to my husband. When the kids arrived, it felt like all the fun disappeared. No more exciting Saturday nights. No more social gatherings. Those were some of the best times, as I recall. The truth is, I was unhappy with my life. I was unhappy with my husband, who hadn't really accomplished much. Sure, the kids adored him, but who wouldn't love a dad who makes toys? He even went to college for that. And he has a master's degree in child psychology, whatever that's worth. Do you know how hard it is to explain that to your friends? You can't just drop that fact when everyone is talking about their husbands. I usually say, oh, he has a degree in psychology and uses it in his work, and move on quickly. It makes him sound more interesting, thank goodness, and saves me from giving too many details because while I dislike dishonesty, I would stretch the truth if I had to, wouldn't you? I knew what I was getting into. I expected he would do significant work, like creating educational programs for kids, not advising on shows like Little Einsteins. Seriously, how do I explain that as a great job for my husband? Melissa, my best friend from the real estate office, has a husband who works on race cars. Now that's impressive. Cindy's husband designs buildings that can withstand earthquakes. And Joni? She's married to a judge. Okay, traffic court. But still, he's a judge. I don't want you to think I'm just focused on the surface. I understand how important it is to do something you love and to feel happy about it. I get that. Honestly, selling and leasing commercial real estate isn't where I thought I would be in my life. I'm not even sure where I expected to be, but feeling this frustrated with my husband and our marriage wasn't part of the plan. I could tell you all the little things that bother me about my husband. There's not one big issue. He doesn't hurt me or ignore our kids. It's more a lot of small annoyances. He snores, burps, and has stomach issues. I hear about these problems whenever he makes a scene in public. He can't help it. But there are moments, like during a movie when he makes everyone laugh, and I just can't take it anymore. His driving really scares me, and I worry for our kids in the car with him. He drives a Mustang and seems to have a need for speed. He usually arrives at his destination before he even leaves, with speeding tickets to show for it. He doesn't like coffee, and I can't understand that. What did I do to end up with a husband who dislikes coffee? He prefers strange beers and turns his nose up at the usual ones I enjoy. He always digs wax out of his ears. He can burp the alphabet, which the kids find hilarious. He insists on singing along with the latest pop songs. Even our kids look at him strangely, especially during school drop-offs. Maisie, who is 16, is completely embarrassed by him. I know how it works. You drop her off quickly, don't say a word, and drive away as soon as she gets out. You're supposed to be unseen as a parent. I remember being that age. It's just how it goes. Him? No, he has to get out of the car, hug her, and wave to her friends, most of whom he doesn't even know. It's so frustrating. Then there's the weekend bike racing with our 14-year-old son, Drew. They come home covered in dirt. I swear they must dig up every bit of mud they can find before returning to our house. He uses my eyebrow tweezers to groom himself. He never puts the toilet seat down, and when he uses it, it looks a total mess, and the smell, not pleasant. He wants to be close at the most awkward times, saying it should happen when the mood strikes. The mood never seems to align with when I want to spend time together. It's always right before we are ready to go out, the few times we have gone out recently. Just when I finish applying my makeup, he comes over and starts touching me and whispering ideas and kissing my neck. I often say, "Come on, Jeff, we will be late." He never helps with the cleaning, and when he loads the dishwasher, it's messy and things don't get cleaned well. Paying bills on time? Forget it. I used to let him handle that, but after the third time we lost power because he just forgot, I took over. I'm sharing all this so you can understand what my life is like. I work in commercial real estate. It pays well, and I earn more than Jeff, which he doesn't seem to appreciate. I consider myself smart. Well, I think I am. I know I'm sharper than many of the people I sell to. My parents have passed away, and honestly, I'm glad. My mom never really liked me. Whenever I did something important, she would just sigh and say, "You're a bit too smart for your own good." It really upset me. What kid can handle that from their own mom? My big sister, Tina, would just give me a smug look and go back to whatever she was doing. Tina was the only person who challenged me intellectually. Having to explain TV plots to your parents is demeaning, right? Tina was everything you might not like in a big sister. Everything she touched turned out well. "Why can't you be more like Tina?" I often heard, with her smirking in the background. Ugh, Tina, smarter than me. She studied political science and worked on election teams for several senators. Need help getting elected? Call Tina. Need someone to handle tricky stuff? Call Tina. Need to feel a bit foolish? Call Tina. Well, that last part was more about me than anyone else, but still. I loved her from a distance and found her frustrating in person because she got right to the point with incredible talent. We hadn't seen each other in years. She moved to Washington, married someone rich, and was now taking time off to sail around the world on their big yacht. She wrote textbooks about politics and taught at fancy schools, living what seemed like a perfect life. It was often hard to get in touch with her because she was at sea. I kept hoping she would invite us to visit, but it never happened, and I wasn't going to ask, so she was just not around. We lived in a suburb of Seattle, and let me tell you, business was good. Recently, our company was chosen to sell a new building in downtown Seattle, and it has been a tough job. Big companies like Amazon and Google wanted office space, so we had to be ready to show it at all times. Melissa, the friend I mentioned, had just gone through a divorce. She was really unhappy for the first 6 months, but after that, she found her rhythm. We were all excited to hear her stories each Monday about her weekends. She often traveled to Las Vegas and would start her stories with, "So there I was, and something wild happened." Even though I knew she was joking, we all laughed because it was clear she had some wild adventures. She seemed happy, but I was not. I needed a break to rediscover myself because I barely recognized who I was anymore. I felt overwhelmed with the responsibilities of being married and taking care of my 2 kids. This life didn't feel like what I had hoped for. I know I'm not perfect either. I have my things that bother me. For example, I can't stand Prius drivers. I get the idea behind the car, but where I live, it feels like some people use it to show off how much they care about the environment. There's a term for that called conspicuous conservatism, referring to people who make a big deal about being eco-friendly. When I see a Prius, I want to scream. And I see plenty around here. So I have my own issues, but I feel more grounded in reality than Jeff does. The frustrating part is, I think Jeff felt lost too. He tried to reach out to me, but his way of doing it was more suited for children. His attempts to communicate were meant for a young child, not a grown woman who was probably smarter than him. It made me both angry and sad, realizing how far apart we had grown. He recognized the gap between us and tried to bridge it, but his efforts only seemed to make things worse. In that moment, words came out that I couldn't take back. He looked at me, and I could see the pain in his eyes. Good. Now he understood what I felt every time I looked at him. I just wanted out. This wasn't how I imagined it would happen, but I knew I had to act. If it had to be this way, then so be it. I was ready to make some big changes in my life, and I believed it would be for the best for both of us. Who could it be? In that moment, I took a deep breath. I was angry, and he was upset. I needed to calm things down. "Look," I said in a steady voice, "I'm not happy. I'm sure you're not either. This isn't working for me. I just can't handle this anymore. I need to leave." I felt like crying as I said that, and Jeff stood up to come over to me. He missed the point completely. He thought I wanted a hug, not realizing that I was frustrated with him. "No," I said, raising my hand to stop him. "No, just sit down." Jeff looked confused and sad. I had hurt his feelings, but all he wanted was to make things better. What kind of man reacts this way? "Jeff, I'm serious," I said firmly, looking him in the eye as he sat down. "I want a divorce. I need to reclaim my life." "I understand," he said, his voice shaky. "I can't stop you, and I wouldn't want to. We all must find our own way in life." That's just typical of him, though. I had listened to his vague words for 18 years, and I couldn't take any more. I felt irritation rising in me, ready to respond when he said, "I hoped we could walk the same path. Clearly that's not the case." "See, I can't handle another saying like that, Jeff. I really can't. Finding our own way in life?" I pretended to air quote it, then pretended to gag. "Do you hear yourself?" He looked at me, and I noticed his face go blank. He tends to shut down emotionally during difficult times. I had seen it happen several times in our marriage. When his mother passed away, when he lost his best friend, when we experienced a miscarriage, and even when I had a car accident and lied about it. He once had a tough time when our kids were involved in an incident at school. They didn't do anything wrong, but they were there and didn't intervene. Jeff was upset with them for days. When the police came to our house, I thought he might explode, but instead he just went silent for days. He had a way of withdrawing emotionally. I didn't know if it was to protect himself from feeling too much, or if he was trying not to get angry. Either way, I saw it now. I should have anticipated it. What do you think will happen now, January? Not Jan anymore. He used my full name, the name I disliked. I guess I deserved it. I don't know. I truly didn't. I knew that a divorce was coming. I had gotten really upset this evening, and everything seemed to be moving in that direction. I realized how unhappy I was, and how much I needed to leave. I thought about a few different plans. I could move out, or he could. We had bought the house together when we first got married, and we were almost finished paying for it. I liked the house, but so did he. I felt torn about what to do next. I knew that whoever kept the house would likely have more time with the kids, and that was where my struggle lay. I loved my children deeply, but part of wanting a divorce was to reclaim my own life. I was overwhelmed with my current situation and yearned for a bit of my old life back. Shared custody could work for us. Despite any problems Jeff had as a husband, he was a good father, and I believed he would say the same about me. Sharing custody would give us both a break, which would benefit both of us. The house was nice, but it was also filled with memories I didn't need. So, I'd been looking for other places off and on. I worked as a commercial real estate agent and had seen some developments. There was a lovely 3-bedroom apartment in a new building downtown that I had been watching. It would be perfect for me, and I could manage to lease it for a couple of years with the plan to buy. In many ways, this felt like a better solution. I had more options available to me than Jeff did. Even though I was frustrated with him, kicking him out and keeping the house would just mean paying him a lot of money every month. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to be unfair. I even tried to talk to Jeff about this, but he preferred to communicate only through email. Neither Drew nor Maisie would give me any updates on him. I didn't mean to pry, but after asking a few times, Maisie said with a bit of edge, "Didn't you decide not to know what Dad is doing?" I paused while making coffee and replied, "Yes, I'm sorry, I won't ask again." I didn't like being spoken to that way by my daughter, but she had a point. The main goal here was to move away from him and the restrictive life I had. It would have helped to know that we were both better off apart, at least for now. But wait, where did "for now" come from? I knew I didn't want to keep second-guessing myself, forever. I was determined that if I wasn't going to hear about their father, then he wouldn't hear about me either. So I asked, "I guess that means your father won't be asking about me, right?" She looked at me, studying me carefully, and then simply replied, "He never asks. So you don't need to worry about it, Mom." I shrugged, although it was frustrating to hear that he didn't miss me at all. He had always relied on me more than I had on him. Shouldn't he at least feel a little sadness about my absence? Anyway, at the end of the 6 weeks I had planned for myself, I took a look at my life and felt satisfied. I was ready to start dating again. The divorce papers were signed and in process, and while I wasn't officially free yet, I felt free in my mind. It was time to get out there and see what was available. 8 weeks later, I realized I needed to slow down. I was out about half the time, going to bars, attending shows, and doing all the things I couldn't do before. I had even taken some evening classes in literature and flower arranging. I had become quite good with plants and could discuss many works of Dickens in detail. I watched many shows that I had wanted to see, which my ex-husband would never have enjoyed. I joined a gym and started working out regularly, and I treated myself to a full makeover. I cut my hair, started using makeup, and changed my wardrobe to feel more confident. I had been out with friends, and we even took a trip to Las Vegas, where I finally met someone. I must admit, it was a bit disappointing. We went to see a show and then hit a nightclub where we ended up meeting some younger guys. The guy I met was named Josh, and he was 7 years younger than me. It was clear in his energy and experience. He thought that being intense was impressive, but it was up to me to find my own satisfaction. It was really just a one-time thing. We didn't exchange numbers, and I felt a bit let down afterward. Even my ex was better than that. He had at least taken the time to understand me. Still, it was my first experience after a long time. I knew I couldn't expect magic from a casual encounter in Las Vegas, and I was realistic about that. It was more about getting back into the dating world than anything else. From what I heard, my friends had better luck meeting people than I did, but that's just how it goes. The fact that besides Melissa, the other girls were married but still out enjoying themselves didn't bother me too much. I wasn't responsible for them, and they could make their own choices. They had supported me when I left Jeff, so I didn't want to ruin their fun over a brief fling that wouldn't affect their marriages. I know it seemed easy to look the other way, but I didn't want to risk losing their friendship by being judgmental. When we returned, I decided it was time to slow down the nights out, drink less, and create an account on eHarmony. I was curious to see what would come my way. What came my way was Tom. Tom was great. He was easy to talk to, interesting, and knowledgeable everything Jeff wasn't. We had 3 lovely dates. He even took me to the opera for the last one. I had never understood the appeal of the opera. Everything was sung in Italian or German, and the stories often puzzled me. Plus, why did we celebrate the larger singers? I never got that part. Being there among all the elegantly dressed people, listening to the beautiful voices was special. If you closed your eyes and just listened, you could truly appreciate their talent. I couldn't imagine Jeff fitting in there. I smiled at the thought of him standing out in such a setting. Tom was tall and thin, which he called wiry. That was different from Jeff, who was short and stocky. Every time I looked at Tom, I was reminded that he was not Jeff. That difference was just fine with me. His thinning hair was noticeable, but I figured that was something we could work with. His noticeable Adam's apple and constant 5 o'clock shadow were less appealing, but if we had a future together, we could figure that out. At first, being with Tom was enjoyable and fun. We even took a weekend trip to Sausalito, where he had a small houseboat. It was quite an adventure being on a boat that rocked back and forth. Being together was okay. It was better than a brief encounter I once had, but honestly, a simple night on my own would have been just as satisfying. Looking back, I realized that night was just a clumsy attempt to feel young again. It was a bit disappointing. Tom was nice, though. He wasn't as experienced as Jeff, but that was to be expected. I hadn't realized how much difference size could make until then. Still, things were fine. It was exciting and different, full of surprises. He brought me flowers. I couldn't remember the last time Jeff gave me flowers. Oh wait, it was the Mother's Day before we parted ways. Actually, there were a couple more times since then, but that Mother's Day was the biggest. All those roses and such. It felt nice to receive flowers from Tom just because. He sent me a big bouquet after our first night together on Sunday. I came to work on Monday, and there they were. All the other girls were really envious, let me tell you. I got all the questions like, does he have a brother? And any chance of sharing? That women often ask when one of them is lucky. But there were a few not-so-great things about Tom. For starters, he cried quite a bit after we were together. I was so confused the first time it happened. I thought I had done something wrong, and it took him a few minutes to calm down and explain that he was just so happy about what had happened and thankful for it. To be honest, it felt strange, but I got used to it. I even started to get out of bed as soon as he finished to clean up, just to avoid the moment. I mean, he was an adult, crying after we were close. It was odd, and I didn't feel like I should be comforting him like a child. I figured he might have some personal issues, and I didn't want to dig deeper. I wanted a partner, not someone else to take care of. The most Jeff would do after being close, at least back then, was make silly jokes about having more kids, and then he'd get me a drink from the kitchen. In some ways, Jeff was much easier to be around compared to Tom's after moments. However, over the next couple of months, more problems came up that made the whole crying issue seem minor. Tom, it turned out, had a problem with anger. Luckily, he didn't take it out on me, but he was often upset with the world. He would get furious, really angry over the smallest things. Big issues? Not a problem. But if someone cut him off in traffic? Good thing he didn't have a license to carry a gun. If someone messed up his order at a fast food place? He'd yell at the manager and blame everyone, including the company itself. He had a list of places he would never visit again because he thought, those people are foolish. I suspected he had probably been told not to return because of the way he acted when things didn't go his way. It was usually about little things. With big things, he stayed calm. We were in a car accident once, and he handled it well, helping to direct traffic around the wrecked cars and calming the other driver. When someone slowed down to stare at an accident, Tom really lost his temper. I often found myself saying sorry for him during those moments. I understood why it bothered people, but his reactions were usually over the top. That was when I learned that this habit of his had real effects on his life. While Tom was a qualified home inspector, he had been let go by almost every inspection company in San Diego and Marin County. He did his job well, but he was a difficult person to work with, and it didn't take long before he would upset someone and end up getting fired. That's why he started his own business, which he struggled to keep running, because he was hard to manage. Some nights we would meet after he'd had a tough day, and he would complain about the people around him. I would nod along, mentally making my shopping list for the next day, because that's really all he wanted. I initially tried to sympathize and connect with him, but he didn't want a discussion, he just wanted someone to agree with him, which led me to tune him out. One night, it became clear just how frustrated he was. He began ranting about something I had complained about regarding our friend Jeff. We had gone out for dinner, and he spent 10 minutes complaining about a kid he had seen while inspecting a home. This kid, he claimed, had picked his nose. Now, Jeff never did that, but he had a habit of digging in his ears. He had a lot of earwax and even had tools to help clean it out. He saw a nurse every couple of months to have his ears properly cleaned, too. I had seen him clean his ears many times. It started off casually but could get much more intense. I had learned to leave the room when things got too serious. It wasn't great, but it was just how Jeff's body worked. He produced more wax than most. I had talked to him about it before, and he had always warned me when he was about to start the cleaning process so I could step away. Tom, however, was furious about that kid digging in his nose. He went off on a nasty rant, and it only got worse as he went on. I thought to myself, even when I was upset with Jeff, I wasn't this harsh. At least I hope I wasn't. It was true that I had distanced myself from Jeff, which I knew could be hurtful, but with Jeff, it was more of a slow build of frustration, not something explosive like Tom's reaction. Among the habits people regret, cleaning wax from your ears isn't even close to the worst, just to be clear. I remember being out with my friends, talking about the people we were dating. I was the only one who had been seeing someone for over a month, so I had more stories to share. My friends laughed at some of Tom's odd behaviors. Melissa kept saying, "If he has a brother, I want nothing to do with him," while she blew bubbles in her drink. Cindy kept asking if the good parts of the relationship were enough to forgive Tom's odd traits. I shot her a look every time she brought it up. Joni just smiled and said, "There are plenty of other options, Jan. Don't settle. You did that once, and we all see how that turned out. Keep your standards high." But these were not the reasons Tom had to go. It wasn't just because he drove a strange car. I could overlook that since nobody is perfect. It wasn't his annoyance with my habit of flipping through channels either. By the end, I was doing it just to tease him, which wasn't nice. I had already stopped paying attention, or his odd habit of ruining the nice coffee I made for him. I had no idea how that started. No, the final straw was his strong dislike for children. This became clear when I was starting to reconsider things anyway, but it pushed me over the edge. He was finished when he criticized my kids. The truth was, I had kept Tom away from my children for a reason. I wanted to avoid confusing them and didn't want to introduce someone new until I was certain. Plus, even though Maisie had said something, I worried they might tell Jeff I was dating someone seriously. I didn't want him to know, even if I didn't think he cared. It was just important to me that he stayed unaware. It took me about 2.5 months to tell the kids Tom existed. He knew I had children and was fine with staying away when they were home. Now I understood why. I introduced them one Sunday. I was nervous about how they would get along. Tom promised he would behave. The kids didn't know he would be there, which I thought would be better, especially with how Maisie had been acting lately. The meeting went. Okay. Maisie was her usual distant self, while Drew tried to engage Tom by asking him about his interests, trying to find common ground. It was going as well as I could expect, to be honest. Tom was trying hard, but I could tell he was a bit overwhelmed. Looking back, the signs had been clear. Tom wasn't married, never had been, and we never talked about kids or if he even wanted them. I thought it just hadn't come up, but I see now that he avoided the topic whenever my kids were mentioned. He knew his feelings wouldn't fit well, so he stayed quiet. I naively didn't notice this. Worse yet, I didn't realize that when Tom got upset, it was often with young people who were struggling with their jobs. Not always, but at least 2/3 of the time, it was someone under 21. I simply didn't connect the dots. Tom just didn't like kids. I have no idea why, but he really didn't. That Sunday, I needed to run to the grocery store to pick up something for dinner. When I got back, the house was quiet and gloomy. Maisie's door was shut and locked, and Drew was in front of the TV, wearing headphones and playing a video game. I came in, put the bags down in the kitchen, and came out with a smile and a glass of wine to find Tom focused on his iPad. He didn't ignore me completely, but he didn't engage in conversation either. Drew didn't respond when I called him, so I decided to knock on Maisie's door just to talk to someone. Eventually, she opened the door, all packed and ready to go, and demanded to be taken back to Dad's, now please. When she joined me in the main room, she pointedly didn't look at Tom. She tapped Drew on the shoulder and said, as he took off his headphones, "I'm ready to leave. You coming?" Drew nodded and quickly went to his room to grab his things. Despite me saying, "But I'm making dinner. It's roast beef, your favorite," I grew more annoyed as they both insisted on leaving. Maisie even pulled out her phone and asked, "Should I call Dad to come pick us up?" At that moment, I felt defeated. I was frustrated. All my planning and cooking were going to waste, but things really unraveled on the ride back to their dad's. While we were in the car, I tried to understand what had caused this sudden change of heart. Maisie sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed and looking very upset. Drew sat in the back, staring out at the scenery. "Okay, so what's going on? What happened back there?" I asked, trying to stay calm. I know that arguing with an upset teenager isn't the best way to solve things. Maisie huffed loudly and turned to face the window, showing me she didn't want to talk. I tried to keep my eyes on the road while also focusing on Maisie. I spoke gently. "Maisie, please talk to me. I can't help if I don't know what's happening." "What's happening, Mom, is that since you don't think Dad is fun enough, we have to deal with rude people." "Thanks a lot, Mom. I hope it's worth it," she replied angrily. I was surprised. "What do you mean? You don't need to—" Before I could finish, she turned to face me. "He grabbed me, Mom. He told me I don't dress the way he thinks I should. Apparently, I'm not what he wants. Honestly, I'm shocked he thinks you are," she said, emphasizing her words. I was shocked. "What did he do? Can you tell me?" "Mom!" Maisie shouted. I was staring at her in disbelief and quickly turned back to the road, slamming on the brakes just in time to stop before hitting a car in front of me. I took a moment to breathe, feeling stressed from both the near accident and what Maisie had just told me. After a second, I turned to Maisie again and asked, "What exactly happened? I need to understand," trying my best to be supportive, not questioning. This felt too serious to doubt. She sighed. Drew and I apparently didn't show enough appreciation. He started lecturing us the moment you left. He talked about how kids should be quiet and listen. When I told him he wasn't my dad and that he shouldn't share his opinions, he grabbed me to say that girls like me need to be taught a lesson. Drew stood by me, Mom. That man is just trouble. I'm never going back if he's there. Right, Drew? Maisie glanced back and Drew nodded vigorously. Absolutely, sis, he said, crossing his arms and looking at me sternly. A car behind us honked, bringing me back to reality. The light had turned green and we were just sitting there. I stepped on the gas and gazed ahead, feeling mixed up inside. This was a real issue. This was really upsetting, not just because of what that man had done to my daughter, but also because it strained my relationship with both of them for months. I was worried about what Jeff would say. He would probably come over quickly, and if he found Tom there, I wasn't sure what would happen. I could sense things turning ugly. Maisie, I'm so sorry, I said, trying to sound sincere because I truly was. And you too, Drew. That situation was completely unacceptable. I can promise you that this man will be out of my life as soon as I get home. I absolutely cannot accept this. I really cannot believe it. I'm so sorry. I didn't even think about the idea that my kids might be trying to trick me to harm my relationship with Tom. My kids were not liars. They were many things, but not dishonest. If they said something happened, I believed them. I took that on faith. I might be many things, but I was a mom first, and I trusted my children. Jeff and I had raised them well, teaching them important lessons about how to behave properly. We were almost at our place, Jeff's place. As I parked the car, I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned to the kids before they opened the doors. Please, I need a little time to get Tom out before your dad shows up. He's going to come as soon as you tell him, and I know I deserve that. But if he arrives while Tom is still here, things could go very wrong. I would rather not deal with your dad in a bad situation, and I'm sure you feel the same way. Can you give me an hour before saying anything, please? Maisie looked at Drew, who nodded slightly. All right, said Maisie. I don't want to come back soon, Mom. Can we wait a couple of weeks? Let's give ourselves some time to calm down. Oh, Maisie, how about I take you both away for a weekend next week? We can stay at a hotel in the city, drive to Portland, or even visit Vancouver. I really want to spend some time with you. I noticed she was considering it. Maisie loved Vancouver, and Drew would always go along with her plans. I'll think about it. Bye, Mom. With that, she and Drew left, and I sat alone in the car, feeling angry and worried that my already strained relationship with my kids might suffer even more. As I drove back to my home, I thought about how I would talk to Tom. I believed what my kids told me. Tom often acted impulsively. For the sake of my relationship with him, I needed to hear his side. Even though I doubted there could be anything that justified his actions, I felt it was important to be fair and listen to him. I stayed calm even when things got really tense. Well, except for that one time with Jeff. But that was a long time coming. I think I deserve a little grace for that. I wasn't in the best mood as I walked into the condo, but I felt better than I might have. Tom was sitting on the couch watching something on TV. He glanced at me when I entered, but quickly looked away and took a sip of his beer. I just gave him a quick look and headed into the bedroom. I searched through the closet and found an old box from Amazon. I filled it with the grooming items Tom had left in my bathroom. I returned to the main room, walked over to Tom, dropped the box on the coffee table, grabbed the remote, and turned off the TV. I stood right in front of him. Can you explain why I just had to take my kids home and that I was told you handled things poorly with my daughter? I spoke quietly, knowing that if I raised my voice I might shout. He looked away and then back at me, his eyes meeting mine. That girl had it coming. She talks back and she dresses. Strangely, she's disrespectful and that boy just sits there with his headphones. He doesn't even feel like family anymore. They are my family, I replied, still quietly. Both of them need a lesson. They should be thankful for everything you do for them, he tried to argue. It was clear he knew he was treading on thin ice, but he hadn't realized it had cracked already. Tom, I said a bit louder, here's the truth. They aren't your family, and after today they never will be. You should gather your things that are still here and leave. I'm holding back from calling the police on you for what you did. If I were you, I'd move quickly because Maisie is telling her dad what happened. and if I'm right, he'll come here looking for you. So, Tom, it's been nice, but now it's time for you to leave my house and not come back." I stood there with my arms crossed, staring at him, challenging him to say another word. I'll give him credit. He did try. "Jan, look, I can be a bit intense. I just think everyone needs to show more gratitude. Your kids are an example of that." He even reached out to me, but I stepped back to show that I didn't want him touching me. "And you thought that treating my daughter poorly would change my mind? Leave, Tom, now, or I'll call for help." I opened my arms and pulled my phone out of my back pocket, ready to call for assistance. When I think back on that day, it's surprising that I didn't even consider I might be in any physical danger. I was just so angry and wanted him gone. Right at that moment, I didn't even think about the possibility of him harming me. I'm not sure if I should feel proud or worried for being so careless about my own safety. "You have 30 seconds and I will call. Just go, Tom, and be grateful I don't keep you here until Jeff arrives." He lowered his arm, looked at me for a moment, then sighed and picked up the box. "I really thought we had something, January," he said as he carried the box toward the door. "I guess you aren't ready to be a partner. Not surprised after everything he put you through." He balanced the box on one arm, opened the door, and I watched him shake his head before he left. He even slammed the door behind him. I exhaled, not realizing I had been holding my breath. I felt a tremble in my body. Was it fear, anger, or nerves? I didn't know. All I knew was that I needed a drink. I had one, and then another because the first barely helped. Sure enough, about 20 minutes later, someone was knocking loudly at the door. I had no clue how he got in since you needed to be let in. But there he was. I sighed, got up, and opened the door to find Jeff looking furious, eyes wide and clearly upset. His gray eyes seemed to burn with anger. He looked around and then just pushed his way inside. I didn't have the energy to stop him. "He's not here. I kicked him out," I said, feeling drained. I knew Jeff would want to check for himself, so I let him do it. Although usually calm, Jeff could become very upset quickly, especially when it came to his kids. He stormed through the living room, the kitchen, the den, and the bedrooms, even checking the bathrooms. Finally, satisfied that Tom wasn't there, he returned to the kitchen, where I was pouring myself, and him, a glass of wine. I suddenly felt exhausted. All the energy had left me, and I was just tired and frustrated. "Here," I said, handing him the glass of wine. He looked at it, then back at me with a look I had never seen before, disgust. Feeling deflated, I sat down. "If you don't want it, that's fine," I murmured, set his glass on the counter, and took a deep sip of mine. "So, how's the single life treating you?" he asked, sounding sarcastic. "Jeff, I really don't have the energy to argue now. The guy is gone, and trust me, he's not coming back. I'm sorry about Maisie being in that situation. Honestly, I didn't know he would act that way with kids. I don't know what else to say." "Well, I do, January. I'm going to Child Protection Services to say you need supervision during visits. This can't happen again, and clearly your judgment isn't reliable. I don't care if you like it or not. As it is, Maisie doesn't want to come back, and neither does Drew. So good job, Jan. You've pushed your whole family away. Well done. I hope you find what you're looking for. I'll just leave now." This was a new side of Jeff. He was hurt and angry, and I felt responsible. Why couldn't I have just been content? Why couldn't I have tried harder? Because I'm smart and I know what I deserve. I'll find what I want, even if it means letting go of my old life. As Jeff left, I called out, "Jeff, if you still care at all, please let me see the kids. They are all I have left." "I'm sorry," I whispered as the door shut hard. I took another sip of wine and stared at the wall. The next 3 months were tough. Work was good. I was in charge of the leases for 3 big buildings downtown and 1 in Redmond. I was earning enough money to start buying the loft where I lived. It was pricey, but it would likely double in value over the next decade, so it was a smart choice. True to his word, Jeff filed for a legal order preventing me from spending time with the kids alone. Then Child Protective Services got involved, and everyone, even me, was interviewed by a psychologist. In the end, surprisingly, Jeff did not get what he wanted. Once everything calmed down and the reports were finished, it was seen as a mistake on my part, but just that. It was a mistake in choosing a partner, not in my role as a parent. Jeff was not happy and let me know through some unkind emails. He had become much more difficult, but as Melissa pointed out, I had a part in that too. I argued that sometimes you have to break things to make something new. He needed to accept that we were not together anymore, and while it was mostly his fault, he didn't realize that, so there was no reason for him to stay angry. Except for the Tom situation, of course. Still, it felt like a hollow win. The next time I saw Maisie, she greeted me with, "What new person do you have for us today, Mom?" It quickly went downhill from there. Kids, like siblings, know exactly what to say to hurt. Both she and Drew made it clear they didn't want to visit. After that first weekend, Jeff sent me an email saying he wouldn't force them to come anymore. If I wanted to see them, I would have to convince them myself. I could have fought back, but what would that achieve? Although I had won on the legal front, the fact that he had tried to block me left a stain on my effort. If your kids really don't want to be there, how could forcing them help our bond? I took a deep breath, put my anger aside, and planned some outings with them instead. That went much better. We had an amazing weekend trip to Disneyland and then to Arizona to see the big meteor crater. Drew was really interested in it. I had to ask Jeff for permission to take them out of state. He was giving short answers, but he did let them come with me. At the end of 3 months, the divorce was final, and I was alone on that day. It was a mix of feelings. There was freedom, but it also marked the end of something I wasn't fully prepared to let go. I spent the evening with a bottle of Chardonnay, looking through picture books and smiling at some happy memories. It wasn't all bad. Melissa and Cindy offered to take me out, but even though I wanted to go, I didn't feel like celebrating in that way. It felt more like a time to reflect, not to party. I knew I needed to mourn this change, or it would take a toll on me. The following week, I was out and about when I met Lincoln. Oh, Lincoln. He had shaggy, curly hair, dark and sun-kissed skin, a wide smile, and the most beautiful blue eyes I had ever seen. We met at a bar in Bellevue, a casual place Melissa thought was fun. I found out he was a theater critic, flown around for openings, and wrote about them on a popular theater blog. He was also writing a book, which I thought was impressive. He was very interesting and easy to talk to. He had traveled a lot and knew so many things. He always had a little story to share about whatever we discussed, something that wasn't well known. It was always a joy to be around him. We shared a strong connection. I knew he was passionate and ready for new experiences. As I got to know him, I discovered he believed in a unique approach to relationships, which made things exciting without being overly complicated. I enjoyed the energy he brought to our time together. We clicked immediately, and each time we were together felt special. His presence was comforting and fun, and we shared a lot of laughter. The time I spent with him quickly became a nice escape from everything else. As our relationship grew, my bond with the kids improved a bit when Maisie started dating someone. Oh yeah, then suddenly she needed some mom advice. Drew followed her lead and we started talking again. I noticed that there was a big gap where Jeff used to be in her stories about her life. This time, though, I wasn't taking any chances. I didn't want the kids to meet Lincoln, even though he asked about it. I just dodged the question and said, "Eventually, when the time is right," and left it at that. I wasn't going to introduce him until he either asked me to marry him or had another plan. I wasn't sure what that would be. The thought of marriage again was confusing. Was I even interested? I had just come out of a marriage that didn't make me happy. Did I really want to jump into another one? I finally had my life the way I wanted it. Was I ready to change that and think about someone else? I had lunch with Cindy and Melissa, and we talked about it. "Hey, girlfriend," said Melissa, trying to act cool. I never understood why she did that. It always seemed a bit silly to me. She was clueless about how it might look to others. I quickly sat down and ordered iced tea, trying not to seem too close to her. Cindy arrived a few minutes later, and just as Melissa was about to start again, I leaned in and whispered, "Don't. Just don't." Melissa lowered her arm and looked uncertain. "Trust me. You just aren't." She sighed, and then Cindy took a seat. "All right, ladies, what's going on?" "So I've been thinking," I started. "Oh no, you don't want to do that," Cindy joked. "It might make you too anxious." I shot her a serious look to show how important this was. "As I was saying, I've been thinking. This situation with Lincoln, I think he might be serious about me. I have a feeling he might soon ask me to take the next step or even move in together. Really? Wow, Jan, you move fast, said Melissa. Well, it's not my choice. The truth is I left Jeff to have control of my life, and I'm really unsure if committing to another guy is the right choice for me right now. Absolutely not. You go, girl. Live your life, Cindy said, raising her glass of water in support. Said Melissa, thinking hard. It's a tricky situation. You left Jeff because he wasn't the right one, right? She made air quotes. But that means the right person must be out there, right? What if Lincoln is that person? What if he's not just a rebound, but someone you could be happy with long term? I mean, things seem fine between you two, right? She gave me a knowing look, and I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. Last night had been tough, and I was still feeling its weight, but I managed to smile. 100% compatibility there, I said, grinning and raising my glass for a toast. Yeah, you sly one, said Melissa, joking around. I just shook my head in response. But what if he's not the right guy? I continued. I'm unsure. I don't feel the need to rush into another relationship right now, but I also don't want to miss an opportunity. It was a confusing thought, I knew. Do you think he's the one? Cindy asked after we had given our lunch orders. I honestly don't know, I replied. He's nice to be with, and I enjoy my time with him, but I have no clue what a future with him would look like. The only way to really know is to give it a chance. Melissa was quiet for a moment before saying, Well, Jan, if I were you, I'd wait and see. You might be jumping the gun here. He might not even ask you. If he does, just see how you feel at that moment. If you're not completely excited, ask for some time to think. You've got nothing to lose, right? I thought about it and nodded. She was right. So, I admitted, yeah, you're right. I was also looking at this from the if not him, then the next guy angle. I mean, even if he doesn't ask, someone is bound to eventually. Just look at me. I made a playful gesture towards myself with a grin to show I was joking. But seriously, I wonder if I'm actually ready for something serious right now. I just got out of a tough marriage. Melissa frowned and looked away. What's wrong? I asked. Jan, listen. You complain about Jeff a lot, but he wasn't all bad, was he? Well, no, but nobody is perfect. Saying he's not Tom is like saying he's not someone really terrible. Of course he's not. I wouldn't have stayed in that relationship for so long if he was. What are you trying to say? Right, but Jeff did nice things, right? Remembering birthdays, gifts, that kind of stuff? What's your point? I asked again, puzzled. I just think you might not realize that guys who do those things are pretty rare. So, just mentioning it? I get your point, but I have high standards. I won't apologize for that. I deserve respect. If whoever I'm with isn't nice or thoughtful, then it's over. It's tough, but that's just how it goes. If you want the best, you have to wait and sometimes let go of what isn't right. I leaned back, feeling good after saying that. Of course, it wasn't that simple. It rarely is, and being honest, I had to point that out. You do have to try with different people to find the right one, and sometimes you might miss out on good ones if you're not paying attention. Jeff was doing well. In some ways, he was even great. But deep down, I knew he wasn't the right person for me. My focus on other things kept me from seeing the positives. I found myself thinking about those words often over the next few months. Melissa laughed lightly. Well, it sounds like you've got everything sorted, Jan. If you do, what does the one mean to you? I'm interested. She leaned onto her arms, resting on the table. Cindy rested her elbows on the table, propping her chin on her hands, eager to hear my thoughts. I leaned back, blinking. It was a thoughtful question. I had not really thought about it much. The one, huh? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think I can tell you more about what I don't want than what I do want. People like Jeff, Tom, and Lincoln have shown me what I won't accept as I get older, rather than what I desire. In a way, I guess I want the absence of certain things. Like what? Cindy asked. Well, like leaving the toilet seat up? I tried to make it funny, but Cindy and Melissa just exchanged looks. Okay, fine. I don't want to be taken for granted. They exchanged smiles, understanding where I was coming from. I work hard. I know he does too in his own way, I said about Jeff. But after a long day, I don't want to come home and have to make dinner or do laundry. Could he at least pick up the kids' toys before I get home? He made a mess too. I paused for a moment, And when I treat myself to a new pair of shoes or a jacket, I don't need that snarky comment he makes, acting like it was a silly purchase. I know it might be, but sometimes you just need to indulge a little to feel good. And while we're talking about this, I continued, warming up to the topic, what's with men always commenting about what I watch on TV? So I enjoy Keeping Up with the Kardashians? So what? Yes, it's about shallow topics. But why does it bother them? But no, Mr. TV Critic has to go on and on about how much he disapproves of it. I mimicked Jeff's tone for a laugh. Cindy chuckled, and Melissa smiled, reclining in her chair. They could relate, as they also had shows they loved that their partners looked down upon. Melissa could not miss an episode of Sister Wives, and Cindy was hooked on The Real Housewives of Orange County, while we all followed The Good Wife closely. Sure, I know these are small problems, but I have my standards. I expect respect and won't settle for less. Life is too short for that. Melissa nodded, and Cindy applauded. Amen, sister. Go ahead and share, Melissa said, returning to her usual comments. I felt uncomfortable. It wasn't the right time to discuss it, but I couldn't ignore it forever. I was just really hungry. Shall we have lunch? I said playfully, picking up a menu and waving to the waiter nearby. Then there's Lincoln. Time went by. 3 weeks turned into 4, then 5. I started to notice things. I wouldn't say things were bad, just different. The excitement faded a little, and I began to see more clearly. It was little things at first. Lincoln was messy in some ways, but very organized in others. He would leave his clothes scattered on the bedroom floor and wet towels on the bathroom floor, but his large collection of books was perfectly arranged by author. If you accidentally put a book back in the wrong spot, you could expect some disapproving looks and heavy sighs. I had never seen someone put away a book in such a passive-aggressive way, but Lincoln managed it. Asking to borrow a book was a mistake. His reasons for not lending one could be ridiculous. Once, he even bought me my own copy of a book so I wouldn't borrow his. For someone who was messy with clothes, he had strange habits. For instance, he ironed his underwear. I just couldn't understand it. I watched him do it the first time and started to giggle, which didn't go over well with him, but it was funny. I mean, really, who stands in their boxers ironing more boxers? He also cleaned his leather couch right after we had spent time together on it. It was a mood killer. One moment you're feeling happy, and the next, he's asking you to move so he could spray and wipe it down. It was all quite odd. While our time together was enjoyable, it began to change a bit. At first, I thought maybe it was just me discovering new things, and I welcomed it. Then I realized 2 important points. First, I wasn't really being embraced in a loving way. Lincoln was focused, but he lacked the tenderness and warmth. My previous partner had been great at that small gestures, compliments that made me feel special, and all those little things that create intimacy. Second, it became apparent that Lincoln had unusual ways of looking at things. It took me nearly a month to realize that he was gradually pulling me into some interests he had. I realized I was being pushed into something I didn't want, and it made me uncomfortable. It began when he acted silly while wearing my things. He would dance around and say, "You enjoy this, right?" I couldn't help but laugh, even while feeling a little embarrassed. Then things escalated. He would come home from work and whisper to me during dinner, "I'm wearing your underwear. Isn't that exciting?" I started to see him in a different light. He did other silly things, like once at a cafe. When a group of schoolgirls left, he bent down as if tying his shoes and sniffed where they had been sitting. I thought it was just a joke at first, but when he repeated it in different places, I realized it was something he really enjoyed. It didn't seem to matter to him who the girls were. It was the action itself that seemed to thrill him. Then came the unexpected items. He brought home things that were surprising, including something I had never expected. I decided I couldn't accept this anymore. I wanted a partner, not someone who wanted to change our roles. I also noticed that Lincoln was often short on money. He made enough, but it felt like it always vanished. I ended up paying for our meals and deliveries most of the time. Things reached a breaking point 2 months after the cafe incident. We had shared an intimate moment, which quickly turned into an awkward discussion about money. He casually asked if I could lend him some. I knew him well enough by then to see that he was serious. In that moment, I understood that our relationship couldn't progress. We weren't close enough for that, and I wasn't going to lend him money. Trying to keep it light, I asked how much he needed. He replied, About 10,000 for a little while. The money from my book was less than expected, and theater critics don't make much, you know. 10,000 just for a little while. I wasn't going to fall for that. I said, I'll think about it. And that marked the beginning of the end for us. It was never talked about again. I didn't bring it up, and even when he tried to steer the conversation towards similar topics without asking directly, I changed the subject. I believe the message was clear. He started to be less available. I would call and invite him out for dinner or to spend the night at his place, and he would say he was at the gym or had a work thing. When he did call me, which wasn't often, it seemed to be when I was busy. Gradually, over 3 to 4 weeks, our connection faded away. Honestly, I wasn't too upset about it. This way, no feelings were hurt, and there was no awkward talk about it. Well, aside from one strange incident, one evening I was taking out the trash. You would think a nice condo would have a trash chute, but no, I had to walk it to the dumpster outside. While I was out there, a woman in her 30s approached me and tentatively asked if I knew Lincoln. I felt cautious. She could be an ex or someone with bad intentions, so I replied, "Who wants to know?" The woman smiled and raised her hands. "I'm not a crazy ex. I just wanted to warn you." I looked at her curiously and asked, "Warn me about what?" "Lincoln has a bad habit of borrowing money and not paying it back," she said, looking serious. "He took nearly 20,000 from me. I don't want it to happen to someone else." I relaxed at that. I had seen this before and knew how to avoid it. I smiled and said, "Too late for me, but I'm not an easy target. He got nothing from me." She seemed to light up at that and said, "Oh, I'm sure he got something from you. The relationship was pretty good, right?" That made me laugh, breaking the tension. I invited her upstairs for a drink. I found out her name was Sandy, and she had been Lincoln's girlfriend a few relationships ago. She was so upset about what he did taking her money and then denying it when she asked for it back that she made it her mission to warn new girlfriends about him and his true nature. I think she was pleased that I saw through his act and simply said no. At the end of the evening, she sighed, saying she had to start again warning the next girl once she figured out who he was dating now. The rest of the evening flew by as we drank wine, shared stories about men, and joked about wishing we could be with women instead, even though neither of us saw ourselves doing that. It was nice to talk with someone who didn't want anything from me. She left at midnight, and I hoped I had made a new friend. The next 3 months felt slow. Maisie broke up with her boyfriend, found a new one, and then broke up with him too. I worried that she was being too choosy, but then I looked at myself in the mirror and realized, maybe I should learn from her example. I decided not to date or look for anything special at that time. Instead, I focused more on my work. I rented out several large buildings and sold 4 condos during that period. I also spent many nights at home alone, just me, the TV, and a bottle of wine. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I felt lonely or not. I went out a few times with my friends, but for some reason, I didn't really enjoy it. I thought a lot about Jeff, our life together, why I left, and all the little things he did that bothered me. Then something strange happened. I was at Whole Foods choosing some fruit, which they always have the best, by the way. In front of me was a dad with his 2 kids and his wife. The dad was playing with the kids, tickling them and saying, "It's in the contract I signed when I adopted you." The kids, who were both Chinese, weakly protested, saying they wanted to see the contract and asked where it said they had to be tickled. The dad just laughed and said, "It's in Chinese, how would you know?" Then he tickled them even more. It was clear that the kids loved it. I just stood there watching and smiling. It was such a sweet scene, and it reminded me of Jeff playing with our kids. He had a Christmas contract that he wrote for them, saying that for every gift they got, he would get a day of playful tickling. The kids had signed it, and the day after Christmas, he started playing with them, running around the house while they laughed and squealed. At the time, I had rolled my eyes at the noise and chaos, but looking back now, I could see it differently. He was being a caring dad, connecting with our kids and having fun with them. When I finally got to my car, I was surprised to find myself crying. Sitting in the driver's seat, I realized I was remembering those times and, to my shock, really missing him and his silly ways. Wasn't that surprising? I mean, it wasn't a total shock. After living with someone for 18 years, there are bound to be good memories, and we often remember the happy times more. Still, I wasn't ready to feel so nostalgic at that moment. The truth is, while having a weak moment and remembering happy memories is normal, having it happen frequently was unexpected. The reasons I left still remained. I was just starting to see things through a longer lens, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a therapist. I can't pretend to be one either. I could have been successful if I had really tried. One evening I reflected on good memories. I had just finished reading a book called The Girl with All the Gifts. It was well written, though not really my usual choice. After that, I was flipping through TV channels when I found the movie Some Like It Hot playing on Bravo. If you remember the movie When Harry Met Sally, there's a scene where the characters watch Casablanca on TV from their own homes while chatting on the phone. Jeff and I had our own version where we watched Some Like It Hot together while on the phone. He would take the movie with him when he traveled, and it became our special way to share a meal and watch a film, even if we were apart. Seeing the movie brought back happy memories of Jeff, and since I had already enjoyed a glass of wine, I decided to call him. I know calling your ex at night when you're feeling a bit sentimental isn't the best idea, but I thought it could be a way to reconnect and maybe restart our friendship. Who knows what I was hoping for? I dialed, and he picked up on the third ring. Right away, he sounded worried. He knew it was me, thanks to caller ID, and asked immediately if the kids were okay. Maisie was out with friends, and Drew was at a friend's house. No, I said playfully. I was just watching Some Like It Hot. It's on Bravo. It made me think of those times we watched it together. Want to watch it with me over the phone? I tried to sound casual and friendly, not too eager, ready to accept whatever he said. He hesitated. That didn't sound good. Let me check. I heard him talking quietly to someone else. Who could he be with? It was late and the kids were gone. At that moment, I realized I hadn't considered that maybe he had moved on in his life too. That was a surprise. Jeff and I had ended things for a reason. Hey, look, January, he said when he returned to the call. Using my full name felt too formal. It seemed he was in another room where it sounded different. I'm a bit busy right now. I appreciate the call, but I have guests here. Guests? This wasn't just one person? Are you at a dinner party? I asked, hoping that was true. Something like that. Can we talk another time? I need to share something important with you anyway. Sure, I said, trying to sound cheerful even though I wasn't feeling it. Whenever you're free. Thanks, he said sincerely. I'll call you soon. Have a good evening. He left and suddenly I was angry, like a light had switched on. One moment I was sad and the next I felt furious. What in the world was going on? I had ended our relationship for many reasons, and now, months later, I found myself at home drinking too much wine, wishing for a different life. Meanwhile, he was out having dinners with friends and who knows what else. He wants to talk to me? Oh, I bet I know what that's about. Is he with someone new? Is he getting engaged? This was so wrong. I had wanted to leave to create a better life for myself, and here he was, living it up. The whole point of my decision was to find the life I deserved, not just for him to go on and enjoy dinner parties. Instead of that future, I was alone, reminiscing about a life I never wanted. It was time to stop feeling sorry for myself and get back on track. If I wanted a better life, I had to make it happen. I couldn't rely on anyone else. This was the push I needed. It was time to get out there, make a plan, and see what the world had to offer. I wouldn't say no to everything. Well, maybe not a complete no, since I didn't want to end up in a bad situation, but you understand. I needed a plan, so that's what I created. First, I focused on meeting new people. You don't meet new faces by staying at home. I signed up for a gym, this time with a personal trainer. It was a small local gym called Jiggle and Poke. It had a friendly vibe, even though my trainer, Mike, was really tough. He was fit and knew how to help me with my workouts, even if he had a strong scent of effort about him. He really pushed me, and I stumbled a lot, and running was not happening at all. I also joined a book club, but 3 weeks in, I realized it wasn't the best fit for me. It was full of middle-aged ladies who liked to complain, and as for meeting single guys, that was unlikely. Still, it was nice to be around women who shared some of my feelings, and I enjoyed listening to their stories. I decided to stick with it. I also enrolled in a cooking class because I still had some feelings about my past experiences with meals. I could cook dinner for the kids, but my real talent was baking. I could make waffles, eggs, pizza, or grab a rotisserie chicken and whip up some mashed potatoes from a bag. But those weren't what I'd call fancy dinners. Jeff was great at that. He loved to cook big meals. His roast turkey and shrimp risotto were impressive. My specialty was desserts, pies, lemon meringue, cookies, and ice cream. I wasn't the best at main meals. Jeff had taken charge of that since I left, and I felt it was time for me to step up in the kitchen. Plus, there were quite a few guys in my cooking class, which gave me a boost. While I focused on improving my cooking, I also wanted to keep things balanced. I realized I was reacting negatively to Jeff moving on so easily. I knew my feelings were important to me, but might seem trivial to others. To help others while I worked on myself, I joined a Meals on Wheels program. After all, some people thought this kind of help wasn't needed anymore. I thought it wouldn't hurt to deliver meals to those in need. Who knows? One day I might be in their shoes. It wasn't the best way to meet single guys unless you were into older men, but it felt good to do something worthwhile. That's what I did. I worked on improving my skills, attended a few workshops, and volunteered for Meals on Wheels. I learned a lot, including how to make bacon-wrapped salmon, and spent time at the gym, where I often pushed myself hard and grumbled about my trainer, Mike, while watching the younger guys and wondering if they were as smart as they looked. My life moved on. I dated a bit, from casual chats in coffee shops to online dating. A few were entertaining, and I did end up spending time with some of them, but none of them felt like long-term partners. Most were not even lasting a week. One guy from the coffee shop, Brian, turned out to be rather forward about his interests. He didn't hold back from the start, talking about past experiences in a way that felt overly bold. It was all quite thrilling, to be honest. My regular life had been a bit dull lately, lacking excitement, but I soon realized that he sincerely meant what he said and wanted me to join in his plans. Don't get me wrong, I'm okay with a little adventure. But then he mentioned using cannabis and then suggested a party one night after we got to his place. I must admit, I was feeling pretty relaxed. Suddenly he called over two friends and I thought he was joking until the doorbell rang and they walked in, looking at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. While I might not have a lot of pride left, I do have some, and I was not going to let them get too close. Honestly, if it was just Brian and me, I might have been okay with it. But one of the guys made a bold move that shocked me. When I looked at Brian for support, he just laughed and encouraged me. Feeling uneasy, I managed to keep my cool. I stood up, grabbed my bag and shoes, and walked out after I gave Brian a piece of my mind. He was too out of it to react. Thank goodness for rideshare apps. I walked a couple of streets away to be sure they wouldn't follow me, waited for my ride, and then went home. I made sure to block Brian from reaching me. I even sent him an unkind email telling him to leave me alone or I would take further action. Needless to say, I never returned to that coffee shop. A few days later, I realized just how risky that situation had been. Anything could have happened to me. I had been under the influence and barely in control of myself. I had put myself in a vulnerable position with someone who clearly wasn't considerate, but I was determined not to let that scare me away from looking for someone I could trust. I continued dating, but I was much wiser about my choices. The issue was that I couldn't help but compare the guys I dated to Jeff. Sure, some reminded me of Tom and Lincoln, and that wasn't exactly a high standard, but most of the time they fell short when I measured them against Jeff. I kept telling myself that if they didn't match up to Jeff, how could they be worth my time long term? Ironically, Jeff hadn't been good enough for himself either, which is why I left him. Yet there was something else that lingered in my thoughts, something I couldn't fully understand. I went out with the girls one night, bringing along Sally, who was part of our book club. The topic came up in a roundabout way. We were sitting in a nice wine bar called the Purple Cafe in Redmond. It's really great, by the way. We were sharing a couple of bottles of Pinot Noir and talking about life, happiness, and the challenge of finding good men when there are so many disappointing ones. Sally spoke up. "Girls, I love the wine and the company, but I'd give it all up for a good guy. I know it's not a popular thing to say, but that's how I feel." Some of the others nodded. I did too, but I felt the need to add, "But do we really need a guy to enjoy life? I'm doing okay on my own." Cindy looked at me and said quietly, "Jan, how long do your batteries last?" "About 3 weeks, maybe 4. Why do you ask?" I replied, quickly catching on to her point. "The fact that you even know that says a lot," she said without looking at me, and took a big sip from her glass. Melissa also nodded. Look, I don't think any of us need a man. It's not like we're stuck in the past, but it sure would be nice. I found it hard to disagree. Sally sadly nodded in agreement. Why is it so hard? Is that all that's out there, people who just play around? I wondered out loud. Brian's situation had happened only 2 weeks ago, and everyone knew about it. When I left Jeff, I thought I could take a breath, look around, and find a good person who was right for me. It felt like standing in a store with lots of options, but finding nothing worthwhile, I said. Hey, at least you had that choice, Jan, Sally reminded me. She had lost her husband in an industrial accident years ago. Although her marriage hadn't been perfect, losing someone like that must have been very tough. I couldn't imagine how I would feel if Jeff were gone. Why was I even thinking about him? Sorry, Sally. I didn't mean to bring that up, I said gently, looking at her sincerely. She shrugged and nodded, accepting my apology. The thing is, Cindy started, I think most good guys are already taken. If they're decent, they're probably still married. What woman would let go of someone good like that? I heard something in her tone that I didn't like. Not all men are great, Cindy. Sometimes you have to leave for your own peace of mind. Cindy stared at me for a moment, then glanced at Melissa, who had been quiet up until now. Melissa nodded and encouraged her to share her thoughts. Was he really that difficult? It was a question everyone had. Even I was thinking about it. I didn't hold back my answer. No, I guess not. But some things he did were so annoying, I felt like I could just scream. He had a way of getting under my skin without even trying. Like what? Sally asked, setting her glass down and leaning closer. Oh, just little things, tons of them. It felt like 1,000 tiny annoyances. Nothing major, just lots of little things. Not putting the toilet seat down, whistling while he cooked dinner, snoring, laughing at silly TV shows. The list goes on. Sally frowned. Wait, whistling while he cooked? Yeah. It might seem small, but it drove me crazy. You have no idea. Just to be clear, you left because he whistled while cooking? What happened when you complained? I never bothered. It wouldn't have changed anything. I complained about his snoring for years, but he never did anything. What could he have done? Melissa asked, also putting her drink down. I don't know. Maybe he could have looked into some treatment? He didn't try that for you? Wow, but you never mentioned the whistling? Not directly. He knew I found it annoying, though. What did you do then? Did you leave the room? Why should I have to leave? It wasn't fair for me to leave just because he was being annoying. Sally looked at the others, her expression saying a lot. Look, I know it sounds small, but you weren't there. You don't see how much it added up. It was happening all the time, little annoyances day after day. I guess. But let's be clear, he didn't act really badly, right? Like chasing you around or anything? I laughed at the thought. She didn't really know Jeff. No, thankfully. If he had tried some things, maybe I would have stayed. But he didn't do those things, which is probably a good thing for him. I don't know, Jan. He doesn't seem that bad. He wasn't hurting you or trying to control you. He loves the kids and wants the best for them. Yeah, but when you put it that way, almost any man could fit that description. I need something more exciting. I don't need to be having wild fun every single night, but there should be a chance for it to happen sometimes, right? I felt like I was standing my ground here, even as my choices got questioned. I wasn't being attacked, but I had to explain my actions and my reasons. The girls shrugged, and I could tell I was making some good points. The truth is, I needed more. I wanted more than just a 9-to-5 job, a neat little house, and a husband who was dull and lacked dreams or drive. Did I love him? Sure. Do I love him now? Sure, that last part slipped out quickly without much thought, but it was said. So, why leave him if you love him? Asked Sally. She wasn't trying to argue, she really wanted to understand. I could sense that she was new to our group and didn't share the same experiences as the others. I sighed. The reasons had been so clear months ago. Wait, was it a year? More? It seemed like so long. The truth was, I needed my own life and the things I found important, including a more exciting romantic life. I just had to. There was more negativity than good. I reached a point where I couldn't handle it anymore. I wanted more. I still do, I think. Again, I said something I hadn't meant to share, and Sally noticed. Think? Not sure now? I shrugged, wanting to change the topic. I picked up an obviously empty bottle of wine and said cheerfully, "More ladies! If we can't find good men, let's at least enjoy good wine." They seemed happy to shift topics too, all nodding and smiling at me. They should be grateful. This wine costs $70 a bottle, and guess who was treating? I shouldn't complain, as I earned more than all of them combined, but a little respect wouldn't hurt, you know? That was how life went for a while. Some nights out, lots of running errands for elderly people. Honestly, some of those meals on wheels were not the best. Now that I had culinary lessons, I could tell a decent piece of meat in a stew, and some of what I encountered was quite surprising. I even thought about starting my own food business because I was confident I could do better than some of the meals from these places. But in the end, I decided my time was better spent delivering the food rather than cooking it myself. The Meals on Wheels did have one unexpected positive, sort of. It led me to Damon. I was dropping off a meal at an apartment building and parked in a spot I shouldn't have. Sometimes that's the best approach because it gives you a good reason to leave. Many of the elderly folks really want you to sit down and chat with them while they eat. While I enjoy that sometimes, there are other times when I have things to do. There I was, parked improperly in the lot, blocking in another car. When I stepped outside, there he was, leaning against his car. He looked a bit impatient and clearly wasn't happy with me. I smiled awkwardly at him, raised my hands in a sorry gesture, hopped into my car, and started to leave. He glared at me, and I think I heard him say something unkind as I drove off. "That's city life for you? It happens to everyone. I found myself doing the same thing before, so you just move on, right? Life is too short for that kind of trouble." The following week, I delivered a meal to Mrs. Peglis and stopped to chat for about 20 minutes. That woman has so many stories to tell, she's like living history. When I returned to my car, parked properly this time, there was the guy again. This time, he had a sheepish smile and some flowers in his hands. He called out to me, and I walked over. He quickly handed me the flowers and said, "I'm really sorry about last week. I was in a hurry and lost my manners. Please accept these as an apology." Now, I don't know about you, but guys approaching me with flowers isn't something that happens every day. Plus, he was quite handsome. I couldn't remember what he said last week and honestly didn't care. A gentleman is a gentleman. With his full head of blonde hair and a solid build, he looked like he could easily work as a security guard. He had a charming smile and a nose that was a little crooked. I later found out he used to be a boxer, which made him all the more interesting. This was Damon. His mother lived in another unit of the apartment building, and he visited her every Wednesday night like clockwork. He was a mommy's boy, or maybe he just valued his family. Either way, I didn't mind. I was quite taken with him. Damon was 46, had been married once, but was now a widower, and he worked in real estate. Well, sort of. He actually built clean rooms places that must be free of dust, like where they make silicon chips. It was all about air machines and cleanliness, not exactly thrilling stuff. But that was okay because Damon made up for it in other ways. He was charming, smooth, worldly, and very smart. I suspected he was smarter than I was in many ways. Damon took me out for coffee. That became a regular part of our meals, going from dinner to breakfast with the usual time in between. He moved quickly, and I did too. Honestly, I was eager. I acted a bit bold, maybe a bit careless. I didn't regret it back then, but now I do. Things moved fast and heated up quickly. In just 2 weeks, we were meeting at least 3 times a week. The closeness was nice. It wasn't the best experience I ever had, but it was much better than what I had before, and I didn't need any extra help. There were times when we really connected, or at least I thought so. I started noticing little things about him, similar to what I did with Tom. These were small things over time. One evening, we were out at a fancy place called the Three Doors. While I ate, I was using my knife and fork like usual. Then I noticed Damon watching me eat with a surprised look on his face. I paused, fork halfway to my mouth with food on it. "What?" I asked, confused, but he seemed to find something amusing. "Nothing," he replied, looking down as he picked up his knife and fork. "No, really. What?" I pressed, intrigued. "It's nothing," he said, focusing on his meal. "I'm sure it is something," I insisted. "Come on, tell me." He sighed and set down his utensils. "Well, the way you eat is. A bit different. At finishing school, they teach you to eat properly like the European nobles do. You shouldn't eat off a knife. The food should go on the back of the fork, he explained, showing me by placing some mashed potatoes on his fork and lifting it to his mouth. See? He said. I looked at him skeptically and then around the room. Seems like a lot of effort for not much gain. It's a fork. You can scoop things with it and do it faster. Besides, I don't see any European nobility here, and if they were, they seem to be doing just fine. I smiled to show I wasn't offended, and he sighed back. I frowned a little. I know, he said, adding, it just seems so. Common here. Sure, we aren't surrounded by kings, but look how everyone else eats. Very few people do it your way. You're effective, but it's not very elegant, and you deserve better than that. And that was my introduction to something called negging. I learned that it's a way of putting someone down while pretending to lift them up. It's a compliment that really isn't, and it makes you doubt yourself. You end up trying harder so the person teasing you will really appreciate you next time. It's sneaky, and it works well, especially if you don't realize what's happening. For example, someone might say, for a girl with a hairy face, you sure know how to look nice. The hidden message is, I have a hairy face, so I must try very hard to look good. I want to make him happy so he won't say that again. This puts all the pressure on you to change so they won't make comments that hurt your feelings. You start to focus on all your flaws, real or imagined, trying to avoid any negativity from someone whose opinion matters to you. This behavior is really manipulative, but it can lead to something even worse, gaslighting. I learned about gaslighting from someone named Damon. I learned many things from Damon, including that the saying, all that glitters is not gold, is true. Gaslighting is when someone tries to change your point of view, not by having a logical conversation, but by isolating you and mocking your reasons for believing what you do. When you say it like that, it doesn't sound so bad, but it really is. It's like taking away all the reasons you have for your beliefs and making fun of them, while surrounding you with ideas from the opposite side, expecting you to change your mind. It makes you feel surprised that you ever thought that way in the first place. It dismisses your opinion as obviously wrong, and makes you feel small for believing it. Take vaccines, for instance. Many people believe that vaccines are harmful, not because there's scientific proof, but because a discredited study wrongfully claimed there was a link between vaccines and autism. Regular, reasonable people still believe this because they have been made to feel that thinking differently is foolish. It's like growing up with one view, then only hearing a completely different perspective from certain media. Over time, some of your strong beliefs will be questioned because of the constant flow of misleading information. Gaslighting is more harmful because it often comes from someone you trust, who you think would not lead you astray. It's manipulative and hurtful, and I know because Damon tried to do it to me. At first it seemed innocent, starting with something simple like the way I ate. He made fun of me when I switched hands while eating. After that, I felt embarrassed and tried hard to change how I ate. It seems silly now, but I was concerned about what this confident guy thought of me, so I tried to improve my behavior. Then it moved on to other things. One day I wore shorts, and suddenly that was not okay. There were a lot of disapproving noises, and I started to rethink my clothes. Next, I had to change my shoes. Flats were out, and I needed to wear heels to be seen as proper. Then I was told the color of my walls was wrong. Things really escalated when he started criticizing my underwear. He didn't like my comfortable styles and insisted I had to switch to something else, claiming I had to wear fancier ones. Honestly, I find those types to be very uncomfortable. They hardly cover anything. Underwear should at least protect you from embarrassing moments. It's hard to feel comfortable in them, and they just feel tight and wrong. Have you ever tried using a tampon and wearing something so minimal? Let me tell you, that does not work well. It was like he wanted me to fit into an idea of what women should be like, as if wearing certain styles would make me feel good about myself. If you feel like you need to wear something uncomfortable to feel attractive, maybe you should rethink things. He really pushed to get me to change my underwear, and when I refused, he became quite harsh about it. He would point out how other women looked, making remarks about choices they made. He even took me shopping to a store and made comments about better options. Some women were nice in their responses, but others, who seemed to share his views, would say things like how freeing it felt. I wanted to be annoyed with them, but just smiled instead. We talked about respect and choices, but he often ignored everything we discussed. The underwear issue was frustrating, but it was nothing compared to what came next, which made me realize more about our relationship. He wanted to explore new experiences, which sounded okay, but it involving others in ways that weren't right for me. It felt like he wanted to share me in a way that didn't feel respectful. Damon was outgoing, fun, liked to have drinks sometimes, but never too much. When we were around others, especially people he wanted to impress, he always put on a show. He really captivated me, especially when we first began dating. When I looked past his charming facade, I saw he was not evil or boring. Instead, he was a bit manipulative. He would often influence others to do things just because he could. Sometimes it was for fun, sometimes to gain an edge, but mostly it was just to see if he could make them go along with his ideas. He did this with me, too, perhaps even more so because I was close to him. Among all the people who should have noticed, I was the one who missed it the most. After a lot of thinking and 2 months of talking it over with my friends, I concluded that Damon was a clever and charming person, but he had some sociopathic traits. As we got to know each other better, I met many of his friends. He had quite a few. Most weekends, when I didn't have the kids, we would go out and he would introduce me to different couples. Our conversations often turned quite personal. At first, I felt a bit awkward. Damon would start discussing dreams and ambitions, asking them about their deepest desires. Looking back, it was quite light, yet at that moment I was amazed at how we jumped from chatting about a movie to discussing personal topics. In our first week out, he mentioned the idea of having intimate moments in unusual places. He asked if I'd ever tried anything adventurous like that before. I hadn't, and I felt fine about it up until that point. I mean, it wasn't something I thought I'd regret. The couple we were with, Martha and Simon, encouraged me to embrace new experiences. Eventually, on our way home, we found a quiet spot along the road. It was a little thrilling, though not particularly comfortable since back seats aren't really made for such things. The next week, we were with another couple, Marcia and Chris, and the conversation shifted again. They asked me about trying something daring in a public restroom. Once again, they insisted I had to experience it. And that night, we found ourselves having a quick moment in the restroom. It was a bit awkward and less than clean, but it felt exciting. Not something I wanted to make a habit of, but it was fun for a change. Then things began to shift even further. Damon suggested I wear more daring outfits when we went out. He wanted me to try something different, like a stylish outfit that made me feel bold. I was just glad I was in good shape, honestly, but I went along with it because Damon had a skill for getting what he wanted. He would say things like pushing my limits and talk about how experiences are important to know where you stand, and we often have wider limits than we believe, insisting that accepting what is normal can help us all be better people and make the world more open-minded. Even now, his arguments seem somewhat convincing, especially compared to issues like intolerance or strict beliefs. But when these ideas were used to pressure me with things like getting my girlfriend to be close to others, well, the thing is, I didn't see it back then. I was in the eye of the storm and couldn't view it from a distance. Damon kept me occupied, either being there himself or hanging out with his friends. The only free time I had was with the kids, and I wouldn't talk to them about any of this. I had a couple of phone calls with Melissa and Cindy, but that was about it. It was only after a night at a motel, one with rooms that opened to the outside, and where he insisted we leave the curtains open, that I started to wonder if this was the right path. The following week, we met with a couple named Martha and Simon, who seemed completely ready for what Damon had planned. We had some drinks and went back to the hotel where we were staying for the weekend. Damon drove, which now I realize was part of his plan to keep me trapped. We were in connecting rooms and Damon and I were intimate. I started to notice the other couple watching from the other side. Next thing I knew, Martha was sitting on the edge of the bed and began to touch me. Thankfully, we didn't have a group situation, but they did end up being close to us, with Martha still interacting with me while it happened. The experience felt wrong, and I was slowly being led down a path without realizing it. I didn't see the situation clearly and was completely unaware of how it might end. I finally had a lunch with Melissa, which turned into a long afternoon. I canceled my only work commitment that day just to sit with her. At first she was excited, but as I explained what had happened, we both started to understand it for what it really was. I was being manipulated. I hadn't noticed it before, and it didn't sit well with me. I still had doubts. Who wants to realize that the person they are with, the one doing nice things for them, is actually someone selfish, or worse, that they had been blind to it all along? This wasn't a kind person. This was someone cold and strategic. Even then, when I tried to explain it to Melissa, who listened with a shocked expression, I still wasn't certain if what I felt was real. I didn't know if he was truly manipulating me, or if I was just seeing things wrong. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, even though his mind games and constant criticism had been wearing me down. I could see Melissa's perspective, but deep down I didn't want to believe it. No, I scoffed. He's just helping me expand my view of things. I kept repeating excuses I didn't fully believe. It's hard to accept something so unsettling you can't believe it about someone close to you. But what else could I do? Admit I'd been blind to everything? That wasn't about to happen. The truth started sinking in by the next weekend. We planned a getaway at his place, a house perched on the bluffs, overlooking a small river. The view wasn't anything spectacular, but he had a hot tub, and I was looking forward to a quiet weekend with just the two of us, unwinding and reconnecting. And it started that way. We relaxed in the hot tub, chatting, laughing, and enjoying the evening. But then, around 10 p.m. on Friday, the doorbell rang. Damon gave me a knowing smile, threw on a robe, and went to answer the door. He was gone for a while, and just as I was thinking of going to find him, he came back, but he wasn't alone. Another man, also in a robe, entered, smiling. I suddenly felt incredibly uncomfortable. Here I was in the hot tub with no towel in sight. I tried to sink lower into the water, hoping it would keep me out of sight. "Ah, January, meet Morton. He's a friend of mine," Damon said, as if this was all casual and planned without my knowledge. It was obvious he'd set this up, but I wasn't ready to accept what this meant. I glanced away, feeling unsettled, and thought of how I could politely end this situation. The reality of his actions was finally starting to come into focus, and I felt both betrayed and confused. He climbed into the hot tub, and I was grateful it was big enough for 8 people. "Oh, don't be shy, Jan. He just wants to discuss some work with me. I find that when someone is more relaxed, they tend to be more honest. There's not much to hide in a hot tub, right, Morton?" He chuckled. "Come on, lighten up. We've come a long way together. What's a little openness between friends?" Up until that moment, Morton hadn't said a word, but his look and how he was scanning my body said enough. I looked at Damon, who seemed excited, and I could see the whole evening laid out in my mind. More drinks, some work talk, even more drinks, a bit of flirting. And then, here's what happened. I went along with it. Even though I knew this was a plan and that I was being led into it, I went with the flow. We talked about contracts, had more to drink, and then Damon moved closer to me. His hand began to wander, and between the warmth, the drinks, and my acceptance of the situation, I soon found Morton beside me too. I kept trying to convince myself this was fine, that it was natural, that sharing this experience wouldn't be so bad. It was. Okay, it wasn't outstanding. Honestly, I felt pressure to please both men, and because of that, I didn't enjoy it as much. I didn't feel like the focus. I felt more like I was there to make them happy. It turned into a series of tasks rather than something enjoyable. I felt like I was constantly trying to keep both of them content. But I did turn down Damon when he suggested something I wasn't comfortable with. I knew I needed time to prepare for that, and I wasn't ready. Eventually, it ended within the hour. Both men satisfied, while I was not. I went to bed and Damon saw his guest out. I pretended to be asleep when he returned. I could feel his breathing become steady, and as that happened, I became more upset with myself. I fought back tears, trying not to make any noise because I didn't want to wake Damon. I quietly got out of bed, gathered my clothes and bag, and left. On the drive home, my own disgust at what I had done hit me hard. Even though it only took half an hour, it felt like an eternity. Once I got home, I poured myself another drink and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I was better than this. I wasn't someone who should be led around like this. I promised myself it would never happen again. Jeff would never have thought about that, not even for a moment. He, at least, had some dignity. Then I found myself crying for many reasons. I cried for how I had been treated, for my own feelings, for letting it happen, and for my life, which I felt like I had managed so well, yet now seemed so out of my control. I cried for Jeff, finally realizing he was a good person and didn't deserve what I had put him through. I got back to bed around 3 a.m. and ended up sleeping late the next day. The kids were with their other parent that weekend, so I had some time without anyone else around. I saw 4 messages from Damon on my phone, but instead of responding, I called Melissa and asked her to come over. Luckily, she did. We talked for hours. I was cozy in my pajamas, sipping hot chocolate, my go-to drink when I felt emotional. She brought her laptop and showed me different websites about what Damon was doing, like the manipulation and mind games. It felt really eye-opening, especially after I told her about the night before. I was angry at him and at myself. I told Melissa and later Cindy, who came over right away after Melissa saw how upset I was, that I just wanted to leave. No arguments, no talks, no explanations. I just wanted to be free from him. I didn't see why I should be the one to handle things maturely. He had caused me pain, and if I were honest, I didn't want to hear any excuses from him because I wasn't sure I could resist his words. He had broken through my defenses once, and I didn't want to risk that happening again. Why give him another chance? This is life in the modern era, where there are many new forms of emotional harm and tactics that are just old behaviors with new names. If Damon could use modern ways to manipulate, then so could I. So I decided to cut him off completely. For those who don't know, ghosting is when you suddenly stop all communication with someone. You don't respond, you aren't around when they try to see you, and you disappear from their life. Maisie told me about this when a guy she dated did it to her. She came to me upset, and I had to ask her what it meant. I imagined it being something trendy, like a new style, but it really just meant walking away and not talking. That's what I did. I blocked his number on my phone and stopped any texts from him. I blocked him on Skype, Twitter, Facebook, everything. I deleted his emails without reading them. It took him 5 weeks before he seemed to give up, or at least I stopped noticing him around. I got a few calls from friends we had spent time with, asking how I was and what was happening, mentioning that Damon told them I had disappeared. They were acting very concerned about me, but really they were just trying to get back in touch. I had already made a mistake once, and I wasn't about to fall for it again. I noticed he waited outside my apartment a few times. I borrowed Cindy's car for a while so he wouldn't recognize mine. Luckily, parking was secure, so you needed a remote to get in. I didn't even think about asking Melissa. She would never give up her fancy Porsche, not even for a friend who needed help. I kept seeing him on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So, on the second week, I asked Cindy's husband for a ride home. She knew my plan. I would put on a show for Damon to see. When he came inside, I quickly FaceTimed Cindy so she could see everything was fine. He left after about an hour and a half, and I asked him to smile really big, just in case Damon was watching. After 2 weeks of him waiting outside, I never saw him again. A week later, Cindy and I swapped cars back, but she jokingly said, loud enough for her husband Paul to hear, "Wow, that Nissan SUV is so nice. I wish I had one." Cindy and Paul had a good marriage. Even if she had small adventures, she truly cared for him. Those moments were very rare and only happened when she was away with no chance of getting caught. I didn't agree with it, but it was her life and her choice. With Damon gone, I had to fix my name and reputation. I still recalled how terrible I felt that night. I wondered why I didn't feel guilty when I left Jeff. Was I supposed to? Did it mean I didn't love him as I should? Clearly, something was off. The next 3 months were quiet. I continued cooking and started a Chinese cooking class, along with volunteering for Meals on Wheels. I got close with some of the regulars, and it was shocking when one of them passed away and I found her. That was a hard experience. I ended up having a few drinks that night. Thankfully, she had made arrangements and left instructions for who to call about her funeral. I was fortunate that her pastor took care of notifying her family. Life went on, and I decided not to date. Maisie settled down with someone she saw often, and I finally got to meet him. He seemed like a nice young man. He had a hoop in his ear, but other than that, he was polite and caring toward Maisie, which is what any parent hopes for. Drew was growing up fast now. He started taking coding lessons at a club after school and said he wanted to make video games when he grew up. I was both surprised and not surprised. He always had a curious attitude towards things, so wanting to be a software engineer made sense. It was the video game part that caught me off guard, because he never showed much interest in them when he was little. He liked them more as he got older, but not during the time I thought he was shaping his career goals. I mentioned this to him, and he said he was more curious about how they were made than actually playing them. He added, "Most people at NASA aren't astronauts, are they?" Which made sense. I focused on my work, sold a big office building, and managed to save enough for Maisie's college fund. I had emailed Jeff about our plans, and he said he would help with the other half, which was great news. But I felt lonely. I became hesitant around men. My experiences from the past year made it clear how tough it was out there for a woman my age. I often asked myself what went wrong with my relationship with Jeff. He was a good man, and I was starting to see that many of the single men weren't, or maybe I just was not good at reading people. I even thought about exploring being with women for a while. Melissa suggested it one night, but not with herself in mind. She casually said, "Maybe you should consider women." I had to admit, the idea was interesting. Another woman might be easier to understand, but as Melissa and I agreed, we were both still very much drawn to men. Most women know the excitement of having a confident man interested in them, and it felt different from what I experienced with women. I was just going about my life when I met Tony. This encounter surprised me. I sensed his interest from the moment I saw him in the frozen food aisle at the grocery store while I was looking for frozen chestnuts for cooking classes. He flashed me a warm smile, showing off his bright white teeth, and I could tell he was attracted to me. His smile seemed to light up his whole face, and his gaze felt deep and welcoming. I had to hold back a shiver of excitement. He didn't wear any rings, and there was no mark on his finger where a ring might have been. Of course, my new cautious attitude made me curious about why he wasn't taken yet. He had dark skin, a nice tan, and blonde hair that was starting to turn gray, but he didn't seem to care about that. He had an easy smile and a lot of laugh lines. He was fit, but not overly muscular. Standing 5'11", he reminded me a bit of an older Robert Redford, with a longer face and a more square jawline. He was not hard to look at, but he wasn't going to be a model either. His voice was deep and smooth, with a southern twang from growing up in Texas. He often said "ma'am" and "I reckon there," and sometimes used "y'all," which made me smile. He knew it made me laugh a little inside and probably did it on purpose once he realized. I was cautious, perhaps too much. When he asked me for coffee, I replied with, "Maybe." We went, and he was funny, kind, and easy to be around. He was making an effort, but it didn't feel forced. I, on the other hand, was still holding back because of my past experiences. But he kept asking. Our first coffee turned into another 2 days later, then lunch, and soon turned into a regular thing for a few weeks, meeting twice a week. Our relationship grew slowly, which was what I wanted. I wanted to understand who he was because I was feeling nervous. He was open about himself and his intentions. He wanted to see more of me and was willing to take things at my pace. I felt in control of how fast this went. There was some light teasing, but nothing suggestive like what I had experienced with Tom and Damon. Everything was very polite, and I found myself liking him more each time we met. He shared that he had been in a relationship for almost 15 years, but wasn't married because his partner didn't believe in marriage. He came home one day to find her crying, but she was firm in her decision. She was leaving to travel the world with a wealthy woman as her companion. She insisted they weren't in a romantic relationship, but mentioned she wanted to be free to explore this new side of herself. She expressed how sorry she was and that she loved him, but needed to do this for herself. She hoped he would understand and said she would reach out when she got back to see how he felt. He had to watch as she took her 2 large suitcases and walked away. That was 3 years ago. For 2 years he had been dealing with his feelings, wondering what he could change about himself to please her. Then, after a year of exploring new relationships, he had a moment of clarity. He finally realized he was fine just as he was. Their relationship had simply reached its natural end without either of them noticing. After a year of dating around, he found it felt empty. The brief connections he made were just that brief. He wanted something deeper. That's when I walked into the grocery store, and there we were. With Tony, it wasn't love at first sight for me. I felt a small attraction, and I enjoyed being with him. Over time, though, I found myself really caring for him. From the very start, I knew he liked me, which felt good. I didn't have to put in a lot of effort, especially after my past experiences. He took charge when it came to planning our outings and dinners. I could just relax and enjoy his company. It reminded me a lot of when Jeff and I were first dating, with all the efforts he made to impress me. I still laugh when I remember the time he planned a hot air balloon ride at dawn, followed by a day filled with jet skiing, shooting, and a horse ride. It was all very overwhelming. Tony had a gift for making people feel at ease. He could talk to waitstaff like he truly cared about them, and maybe he did. He also knew how to calm down tense moments. One time, while we were waiting for a chicken burger at Chick-fil-A, an argument broke out behind us. Two families were getting upset because their kids were wandering around, causing confusion in the line. I just watched, remembering that it's usually best to stay out of such family disputes. But Tony jumped right in, flashing his bright smile and making silly jokes. Somehow, he got them to stop fighting and even convinced them to buy lunch for each other. It took some stories, some bad jokes, and a good 15 minutes before they settled down. He even got the manager involved at one point. Honestly, it was impressive. He really had a talent for bringing people together. I made a joking comment that he should do this for a living, and he laughed, saying it was just too tiring. In just 3 months, our feelings blossomed from warm to incredibly passionate, and it was wonderful. It was just what I needed to heal my heart. I introduced him to my friends Cindy and Melissa during a night out. After a while, I noticed Melissa smiling and giving me a thumbs up when he went to the restroom. Cindy even asked if Tony had a brother. I gave her a look because she was married. He was funny and playful with the girls. He found a way to compliment them, then turned it into a compliment for me. He would say things like, "Wow, you all look like lovely sisters. You must have the guys all around you. Thankfully, I got this one, the shining star." Everyone, especially me, liked that. We even had a night out with 3 couples, including Cindy's husband and Melissa's latest date. I just wanted to see how he was around other men, and it was nice. I didn't think we'd become best friends overnight, but he seemed to socialize well and showed interest like everyone else. By the end of 3 months, I knew this was right. There were no hidden problems, no teasing, and just a lot of respect and care. I introduced him to Maisie and Drew. They weren't overly excited, but they weren't against him either, which is a big deal for a teenage girl. It felt almost too good to be true. I spent 3 months waiting for something to go wrong, but it never happened. I kept looking for a hidden issue, thinking something had to be there. Sure, there were some things. Tony was a bit messy. He did laundry only when he really had to and never ironed his shirts. He loved watching reality TV. He liked to sleep in and skipped breakfast. He made annoying sounds when he was thinking, asking silly questions that had obvious answers, just taking his time. That could be pretty frustrating. Sometimes he was too easygoing when I wanted him to be more assertive, and then he was too loud when I thought it was better to stay quiet. One time at Chick-fil-A was an example of that. He also collected old lunchboxes from the 1950s. I could understand collecting things like antique watches, but lunchboxes? He had a whole basement full of them. I wondered what his ex thought about that. These were all small things. Yes, they were annoying, but in the bigger picture, they were things I could either accept or help him change once we were together more seriously. Oh yes, that was definitely going to happen. This was my happy ending. This was why I left Jeff. It took a while to find my prince after a few wrong choices, but here he was at last. One thing I discovered early on turned out to be a big issue. Tony couldn't lie even if he wanted to, and he never tried. He was not always truthful, that was clear. But if you asked him directly, he would tell you what he believed. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems dangerous to me. Just ask anyone who has ever answered the question, "How do I look?" You never give a straight answer to that, right? But he had a unique way of speaking the truth that didn't hurt feelings. He could point out that my hair looked messy or that my pants didn't suit me without making me upset. Instead of being offended, I would think, "Oh, he's right." It was surprising to see him do this with others. It felt like he had a special power. It was the opposite of Damon, who always put me down. I had to really ask Tony for his opinion because he didn't want to share it, knowing I might not like what he said. So no worries there. Our relationship was fine. It wasn't wild or exciting, but Tony was good at making me feel comfortable and relaxed. It was a different kind of connection, one where we shared ourselves with each other. That was what I needed. I'd had enough of fast flings that brought back bad memories. I wanted a mature kind of closeness. The funny part was, I started feeling happier and more at ease since I met Tony. Even my thoughts about Jeff, which were often on my mind, became gentler. I found myself remembering the good times we shared more than the bad. The negative moments didn't seem as important anymore. I wasn't sure if I was just becoming more accepting of marriage, or if I was seeing everything through a positive lens with Tony in my life. Either way, it felt fine to me. I also realized that I hadn't seen Jeff in person for over a year. When I thought about it, it was surprising. We had been polite at school events and exchanged emails and texts, but we hadn't actually seen each other in 14 months. Since then, I had been busy, and seeing him again hadn't crossed my mind much. With the kids not talking about him, I really didn't know how he was doing since that last awkward phone call. The communication I had with him had improved a lot, and I had also changed my thoughts since the phone call. I'd gone back to thinking, he's not worth it, I'm better off without him, until I met Tony. That made me soften my feelings as well. There was a reason I was thinking about Jeff. I had a recent mammogram, and if you ask any woman over 40, they will tell you it's not a fun experience, but it's necessary. I ended up waiting in the room for an hour, which was longer than expected. Normally, like most people, I would spend that time playing games on my phone, but my phone had only 10% battery left, so I didn't want to waste it on games. Instead, I did what anyone does while waiting at the doctor's office. I browsed through some old magazines on the coffee table. I found a somewhat recent Time magazine, and the most interesting article was about a new gaming device that was popular across the country. It was the latest must-have toy. This small box had screens on each side that acted like a tiny house with a family living inside. The great part was that it was designed for kids aged 3 to 14. When you bought it, you entered the child's age, and then the device adjusted itself to suit that age. The activities available in the game changed according to the child's age, and every 6 months, it added new options for the kids to explore. The screens could tell how you were looking at them, making the images appear three-dimensional. It felt like you were peering into the little house, as if the screen were a real window. You could move the box around to look into corners or up and down. Not only was it supposed to be fun, but it also had an educational side. You could talk to the characters in the house, and they would share information about history, cultures, or great books. The idea was that if kids were curious, they could later look up more information on their tablets. The game would adapt to each child's interests. If a child was excited about a topic, the game would provide more details. If not, it would shift to different subjects. The box had an online connection, so it could refer to a larger database of topics, making the game very specific if it needed to be. It was a clever concept and caught Jeff's interest. I thought it was exactly the sort of thing he would get into. I wondered if he had been involved enough to use some of my phone's remaining battery to find out about the company that created it. No, they were from Boston, and Jeff's group was in Seattle. They were hired to review and design for big companies like Hasbro, not for smaller groups like this one. The place was called My Uncle's House, which was fitting because the idea was to create a second family feel. Still, it was interesting, and it was perfect for Jeff. That made me think about him and us. Now that Tony was here, I was ready. We agreed on important things. He cared about me, and I felt strongly about him too. I wanted to move in together and share everything. I was ready for us to take that step and maybe even talk about being engaged. I was excited about the idea and was dropping hints that we should, at the very least, exchange keys to our homes. Or maybe jump straight into the big step of living together, or even consider a real proposal. I was definitely ready for that. I was eager. Then he started hinting at something too. A work event was coming up. Tony managed shopping malls for a real estate company. He hired security and took care of the offices that managed those malls. It was a job I hadn't thought much about before, but it made sense. Someone needs to hire the cleaning staff, keep the buildings in good shape, ensure the shops follow safety rules, and organize events like visits from Santa and the Easter Bunny. There are many little tasks to keep a mall running smoothly. In his free time, he was also active in the local Elks Lodge. For those who might not know, the Elks are a charity group that builds community centers and supports local causes. They have lodges across the country, and most volunteers work for free. They focus a lot on helping local veterans and providing a place for them to connect. The group has a vetting process for new members which made me laugh. There was no way I'd join. Who knows what they might discover about me? Even so, it was a great place to help the community, and I was happy for him. Tony mentioned an upcoming Elks event, and he wanted me to join him for the dinner. He hinted that he had a big thing planned and wanted me there for it. He said it would be a significant moment in his life. You can guess how excited I was. The big question on my mind was whether he was just thinking about moving in together, or if there was a marriage proposal involved. I had lunch with my friends a few times to talk through the possibilities, exploring what it could mean and how I should respond. We discussed what to do with my condo, what kind of wedding to have, whether to go somewhere special or have it locally, and who to invite. What if he just wanted to get married in Vegas? It felt a bit silly when I found myself writing Mrs. January Stevens. I even imagined what it would look like signing his name. What was I, 14? I was really excited. The kids noticed it too. Then the big night arrived. I spent the afternoon at the salon, getting my nails and hair done, and I had my makeup done professionally to make everything perfect. I used waterproof makeup because I didn't want to mess it up if I cried. Driving to the hotel where the event was held filled me with joy. I had planned to meet him there since he had to be there all afternoon setting things up. I was ready to start the next chapter of my life. It felt like a really important night. It was strange knowing this was happening. When Jeff first asked me to marry him, I had no idea it would happen. It was at a party with all our friends. He took the microphone from the DJ, made a speech, and then knelt down. I was surprised, and it was so romantic. I have to give Jeff credit. He was a true romantic. Of course, I said yes, and then he showed me a ring. Thankfully, it was perfect. I am picky about jewelry, and there was a chance he could have picked a bad one, but he brought my sister with him to choose it, and she helped him find a great one. That evening was magical, and I think back on it fondly. We had many good years, and not everything about Jeff was bad, I told myself. Now, though, knowing what was coming, I had to choose the right dress and the right makeup. We would be looking at pictures for years, so it all had to be perfect, and it was. I looked beautiful, and Tony did too. He wore a stylish dark blue suit, a crisp light blue shirt, and a bright red tie. We sat together through the evening. He introduced me to people, but I wasn't really paying attention. I was waiting for the moment he would ask the big question. I made sure to go to the bathroom only when necessary and kept my drink light, just so I could catch the signal. The evening moved on. Dinner was all right. The salmon was a bit dry, but with over 200 served, it was impressive that it was as good as it was. Then the awards began, and Tony received one. It was the last award given that night, the Most Valuable Officer Award. I could see that it meant a lot to him. He looked a bit nervous giving his speech. When he sat down, the leader spoke again into the microphone and announced that Tony had been given the chairmanship of the Board of Trustees. Tony had to get up and speak once more, and this time he was ready and confident. Everyone clapped loudly, there was a dance, and many people came by the table to congratulate him and say hello to me. It felt like the right moment never arrived. By 11 p.m., people seemed tired, and I was sitting there waiting for him to talk to me. Suddenly, he smiled at me and mentioned that he had a hotel suite upstairs. He invited me to join him for some champagne he had there. In that moment, I realized that whatever he had in mind was just for us, and it would happen there. With a smile, I took his hand and said something like, "Lead the way, kind sir." Sometimes you say silly things when you're excited, right? When we got to the suite, just as he said, there was champagne in a bucket, glasses, and everything. He poured us both a glass, we clinked them together, and he toasted, "To a wonderful evening." And I hoped for an even better night. After we enjoyed the champagne, he reached for me, and I was eager. If he wanted to be close with me before sharing his good news, then that was exactly what would happen. And it did. And it was nice. What was less nice was that afterwards, he turned over to go to sleep. I sat in bed looking at him, wondering about what had just happened. This didn't feel right. It wasn't how I thought things would go. After about 20 minutes, I shook him awake. We needed to talk now. I had to know. He looked sleepy and tired, yawning as he asked, "What? What is it, Jan? Do you need something?" He had a playful grin on his face. "Tony, don't you have anything to say to me?" I pressed, sitting there and staring at him. You know those moments when everything can change? Those seconds when no words are spoken, but the expressions tell the whole story? Where you can almost see someone's thoughts? This was one of those moments for both of us. I saw confusion on his face. Had he forgotten something? What could it be? Then he looked at me, his face showing a mix of expectation and a fragile hope. I could see him figuring out what he thought I wanted to hear. Realization crossed his face, followed by sadness, and then he put on what I called his concerned poker face. This was the look he had when he wanted to say something but was worried about how I would take it. Remember when I said he was very honest? Here it was, clear and straightforward. I felt a mix of hope, longing, and, to be honest, a little worry. Had I misunderstood the signs? Was all of this just a trick of my own hopes? In that moment, seeing the changes in his expression, I realized I might have been wrong. My disappointment showed on my face, and then his worried expression appeared. The truth is, I like to think of myself as a fighter. But sometimes you fight for things that aren't real. That's what I did. I spoke without thinking and asked some very personal questions of a man who was tired and honest. What a mistake. Jan, I don't know what to say. You were thinking. He struggled to respond. I sat there feeling low. Maybe a tear fell. I wasn't sure. I nodded, feeling lost. You thought, he said, more like a confirmation than a question. You said tonight was a special night. I thought, hoped, I said, my voice shaking. He sighed and reached for my hands. Jan, I meant that I was being honored tonight. I knew it was happening, and I wanted you here with me to share it. I didn't mean to give you the wrong idea. Why can't we? I asked, my voice full of feeling. Why can't we what? He asked, clearly confused. I hadn't said what I expected. Move in together, get married, make it official? I said after taking a breath. And that was when everything changed. He sat back, surprised, letting go of my hands. I could see many thoughts racing through his mind. Jan, I'm not going to ask you to marry me, he said firmly. He looked at me seriously as he spoke. What? I stammered, my voice wavering. This was not what I expected. This was the complete opposite. What we have is great, Jan, but I'm not looking to get married, not to you or anyone. I really enjoy our relationship and want to keep it as it is, but it won't change. His voice was steady, and he kept looking me in the eye, not in a harsh way, but in a kind, sincere way. He was being honest and trying not to hurt me. But why? I asked, genuinely confused. I thought we were ready to move forward. What's wrong with that? Oh, no, Tony said quietly. I don't know what to say, Jan. I don't know any way to let this down. In that moment, I felt a change, and my whole attitude became serious. Oh, so there are issues, Tony, I said, not angry but firm. I was moving from feeling sad to frustrated quickly. Well, the thing is, Jan, we've had a nice evening together. We've shared something special. I don't want it to end with us arguing, do you? To me, it felt like he was trying to avoid the real conversation. You can't say something like, I don't know how to let you down gently, without explaining it. Not when you're talking to me, anyway. No, we need to talk about this. I expected more from you, Tony. He sighed, looking closed off, and said, Fine. He slowly got out of bed, walked to the champagne bottle, poured 2 glasses, and returned to the bed, handing one to me. He sat down in a chair beside the bed, placing his glass on the nightstand. Leaning forward, he rested his elbows on his knees and pressed his fingers together. Okay then, he said, avoiding eye contact. January, you are an amazing woman. You have passion, you have goals, and you seem to know what you want and go after it. He paused, took a sip from his glass, and then set it down again, leaning forward as if deep in thought. I think you are charming, fun, and a wonderful partner. He paused and glanced at me briefly. But you also have some flaws. He fell silent for a moment, waiting for me to respond. I sat there quietly, holding the sheet around me and staring at him. I didn't have anything to say, just raised an eyebrow. This was his moment now, and it felt like it would continue. He looked at me for a bit before dropping his gaze to his hands. In a flat tone, he said, Honestly, you can be sharp with your words. You sometimes treat others poorly if things aren't exactly how you want. You have a certain way you expect things to go, and when they don't, it can cause a reaction. He glanced at me again, seeing my unreadable face, and kept going. Everything around you goes through your own perspective. Your first thought is about how it impacts you. You make judgments about things, and when they don't turn out as you expect, you become frustrated. Tonight's conversation is a perfect example. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He watched me, concern on his face. I don't want to keep going in circles, January. I bit my lip and said slowly, "No, just be honest. That's what we need right now. If we were going to confront the truth, it was better to do it quickly." "So be it," he said quietly, looking away again. The words were spoken in a tired tone. "The truth is, January, sometimes you can be difficult and not very nice. It doesn't happen often, and I like to think of it as just being you. It works better when we have some time apart. But the idea of us being married, I don't think that would be good for us. We are too different, and when we argue, it wouldn't end well." As he spoke, I felt myself tightening up even more. I was sure my body showed how I felt. One part of me felt sorry for him. I could see that he was trying hard, and it was tough for him to say such personal and negative things. It clearly bothered him, but he also felt he had to be honest. His inner struggle was clear. Honestly, though, while I understood that in some way, I didn't care. This man, the one I thought was meant for me, the one I left my husband for, was basically telling me that I wasn't good enough for him. There was a certain fairness in that, considering how I had treated Jeff. But I wasn't going to admit that now. No way. Right now, I didn't want to show any feelings. I was frustrated with Tony, his attitude, and the fact that he couldn't see how great we could be together. I just think this relationship is where it needs to be right now, January. Nothing more, nothing less. He seemed almost desperate. I was done with him. "I need to go," I said firmly as I got out of bed and avoided looking at him. I got up feeling messy and not caring. I moved around looking for my shoes, putting my dress back on, and searching for my belongings. While I was doing this, he kept talking. He might be a great negotiator, but he didn't understand women at all. For the first time, I started to wonder why his wife had left him. Maybe she knew something I didn't. Maybe I was figuring it out myself. "January, please. You don't have to go. What we have is good, even special. I've never met a woman I liked as much from the very start. Please, we can still have something nice. Don't leave like this." I found my shoes, put one on, grabbed everything, and walked to the door, glancing back at him. "Tony?" "Yes," he replied, hope on his face. "I'm done with this," I said, then opened the door and slammed it shut behind me, the only satisfying thing that had happened since I woke him up. As much as I wanted to take a moment to breathe, I really needed to get out of town. As I made my way down the hallway, I took out my phone to call an Uber home. Fortunately, the hotel was not far from the city center in Seattle. I requested a ride, and the driver, Wanda, was only 5 minutes away. I walked to the brightly lit entrance of the hotel where people were still coming and going, even though it was past 1:30 in the morning. Thankfully, it wasn't too cold, and for once it wasn't raining so I could wait outside. When Wanda arrived in her Prius, I climbed in and we headed home. She kept talking throughout the ride, chatting about random topics. I just gazed out the window trying to spot the stars, nodding along and saying yes and oh sure whenever necessary, doing my best to stay calm and not to cry. We reached my home in less than 35 minutes. I hurried inside, tossed my clothes aside, and took a long, refreshing shower. After wrapping myself in a robe, I poured myself a drink and went to sit on the balcony. The drink turned out to be cognac, which had a strong taste as it went down, but I didn't mind. It suited my mood. Sitting on the balcony, I looked up at the moon and across the city of Bellevue, reflecting on my life and my experiences. A part of me felt angry. I was frustrated and upset, trying to forget a lot of what I had just heard. It hurt to think about it. I understand who I am and where my weaknesses lie. I didn't need someone who I thought would be by my side forever pointing them out, especially not tonight. I wondered what was wrong with me for choosing the wrong people again and again. Jeff hadn't been terrible, but he still wasn't what I wanted or needed. I had hopes and dreams that weren't being fulfilled. What was the world expecting from me? After sitting there for about half an hour, dealing with my emotions and the drink, I finally reached my breaking point. I felt exhausted, frustrated, and hurt. In a moment of impulse, I stood up, leaned over the balcony, and threw the glass away, letting out a loud scream. All of my feelings poured out at once. The sound echoed briefly, and I could hear the glass shattering on the ground below. Realizing what I had done, I quickly went back inside. It was nearing 3 in the morning, and I didn't want to explain my actions to my neighbors. Still, it felt somewhat helpful to release my emotions, even if it wasn't something I wanted to do often. The glass was one of a special set given to me and Jeff as a wedding gift from one of my college friends. Sure, I still had 5 left, but I didn't want to use any more. I went to bed, and even though I felt sad, I managed to sleep. I took the next day off and the day after that. Cindy and Melissa called, and as soon as they realized I was feeling down, they came over to keep me company. I was in my worn pajamas, having not showered or gotten dressed since I got home. We watched some not-so-great movies, ate ice cream, and shared some wine. I complained a lot and tossed cushions around, behaving like many women do when they feel hurt by someone they care about. Tony called to check on me. What a nice guy. Melissa answered and chatted with him, saying I was okay and that he didn't need to do anything. I appreciated the gesture, but I felt he had already done enough. So that was it. I dealt with my feelings. I felt terrible, taken for granted, and foolish for imagining things that weren't real. All the typical feelings you would expect. And then Tina came home. Oh, Tina, family can drive you a bit crazy, right? Mine does. They know all your secrets and history. An older sibling can have a way of bringing you down with just a few words. Tina had that power over me. It was 3 weeks after what we were calling the award night mess. What a perfect word for it. Tina showed up out of nowhere one evening. She knocked on the door with a bottle of whiskey in her hand and said after a quick hug, "Dinner's on me, then we'll come back here and relax. Go put on some jeans. I'm hungry." I had no idea how she found my new place. She had been out of touch for so long, especially since I hadn't even told her about my divorce beyond one awkward call. How did she know where I lived? I felt a bit uneasy. I was used to being in control of my life, but when my sister Tina comes around, I felt like I was 14 again, uncertain and hoping no one noticed how young I felt. I stood there looking at her, surprised to see my sister again. She looked good. She had lost some weight, had a nice tan, and her hair was a sun-kissed blonde from being outside a lot. She was petite, around 5, 6, with sharp brown eyes and a small mouth that often smiled. Honestly, we didn't look too much alike. I was taller at 5'9", and heavier than she was, although she had a smaller frame than I did. As kids, I loved teasing her as I started to grow up. My hair is a rich brown and my eyes are blue. We share the same nose and face shape, but in personality we are very different. I am all energy and fire while she is relaxed and thoughtful. Of course, she has her moments too. She can be incredibly sarcastic, and her humor is more British than American, as people tell us. She enjoys popping pretentiousness, and it's often entertaining to watch, unless I'm the target, which happened quite often. "Come on, Jan," she said, laughing. "Are we going to stand in the doorway all night? I brought gifts." She held up a bottle. "I couldn't be away for 3 years without a gift. Let's put this down, you can change, and we can have dinner. We have so much to catch up on. I had to find you here. Come on, time is flying and Mama is hungry." I had forgotten how fast she spoke and how she expected you to keep up with her. Maybe we were more alike than I realized. "Okay," I mumbled, stepping back from the door and letting her in. She placed the bottle on the table and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I just stared back. "What?" "Come here," she exclaimed, wrapping me in a big hug that melted my heart. My sister was back, and I could smell the familiar scent of oranges in her hair. "Oh, Tina," I said, unable to hold back the tears. Hey, she said, stepping back and holding my shoulders. "It's okay, little sis. I'm so sorry I wasn't here before, but I'm here now. Let it out, babe. Tina's got you." She watched me as I cried, still feeling hurt from everything with Tony, even though I hadn't seen him in a while. I was just busy working and coming home, not even volunteering or taking any classes. "Go on," she encouraged, guiding me toward the bedroom. "Get changed and let's go eat somewhere nice. My treat. Then we can drink from the bottle, have a great time, and share all our secrets like we used to." I gave her a faint smile, realizing how much I had really missed her. Life is best with the people you care about. I always thought you have to make yourself happy because no one else can do it for you. So when she left, I moved on and found other things to fill my time, like raising kids. Now that she was back, I understood just how much I had missed her. I went into the main bedroom to grab some jeans while Tina continued to chat excitedly as she looked around the condo. I went by the old house to find you. I wanted to surprise you, but I was the one surprised. You left him. We need to talk about that. I love the big windows in this place. I stepped onto the nice balcony as I pulled on my stone-washed jeans, looking for some socks to match my cute ankle boots. I heard the door open again and saw her walk back in. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror. I looked okay, not fantastic, but it was all last minute. It was good enough for me. I walked over and found her looking through my cookbooks. "Cooking now? Is there no end to your new skills?" she asked with a raised eyebrow, holding up a book called How to Be a Domestic Goddess. "Not much space to do that on a boat, sadly. I'm envious. You have such a nice place, Jan. Very you." I chuckled. Not like I had many choices. Well, that was up to you, wasn't it? There was the Tina I knew, straightforward and right to the point. I let out a sigh, and she showed some kindness. "Let's wait until we have a few drinks. You will be more open then." Again with the honesty. So we went with that plan. She had a car parked downstairs. "Another Prius!" I almost remarked on it when I saw it. She looked at me curious, and I explained as we drove to the restaurant. "Gaucho Grill. Wow, one of the best steak places around." Well, she asked where I wanted to go, and since it was her treat, why not? Once we were seated with wine ordered and our dinners chosen, I had the filet with lobster and she picked a flaming skewer of steak that came out on a sword. Yes, a sword. We just looked at each other. She picked up her glass and smiled brightly while I sat quietly. I didn't want to start any difficult topics. I didn't need to worry. She was ready to jump right in. "So where should we start, January? You left your husband and kids, moved, new friends, and it seems some folks think your daughter is ungrateful. What do you want to share?" I sat there and sighed. I knew this would come up as soon as I opened the door to see her. I'd have to explain what happened, why it happened, and justify myself. She'd ask tough questions just like a sister can. She must have noticed my hesitance and gave me a crooked smile. "Come on, sis. Lots of interesting things happening in your life. Can you blame me for wanting to hear all about it?" I looked at her, sighed again, and decided to just tell her everything. "Well, it has been building for a while, honestly. One night I just reached my limit. I snapped." He said, "I spent the next couple of hours sharing everything about my life from that night with Jeff to how unhappy I had been before that, right up to the night Tony told me everything. I was as honest as I could be and shared my story completely. It was better talking to Tina because she could tell when someone was not being honest. She would keep asking questions until you gave her the truth. She had a talent for sensing even the small things you might not say clearly. Tina was always a good listener. As kids, she would nod, gasp, and show sympathy at the right moments. It felt nice to share stories with someone who was truly interested. It made everything easier. We enjoyed a nice meal, drank a bottle of wine, and started on a second. And then we are here. That's city life for you. I took a big sip of wine and relaxed, spinning the glass in my hand. We paused for a moment as we both reflected on everything I just shared. Then I asked, "So what's new with you?" We both laughed. It was a good moment. She smiled, raised her glass for a toast. "To my sister, whose life is never boring." We clinked glasses, and I smiled, then asked, "Seriously, what have you been up to? Any adventures lately?" Tina shifted in her seat and replied, "That's a story for another time, Jan. Sailing has taken up a lot of my time. You wouldn't believe how dull it can get. Luckily, I have a great companion for it. But let's talk about your story. I need to ask you some questions." I thought, here it comes. "Of course I've seen Jeff. He told me where to find you. It was meant to be a surprise, which it was, but I didn't rush over to see you right away. I actually visited last night and had dinner with him. It was quite revealing. Now that I've heard your side, I understand more." "The whole thing?" I asked, mimicking air quotes. "Jan, you're clever. But even you must realize that looking at things from one side means you don't see everything. You know that? Jeff has his perspective, too. This was my chance to hear it. So now I have a clearer picture of what happened between you two, or what was happening." I was curious despite myself. I knew very little about Jeff's life now, and after everything I'd been through, I wanted to see how he was doing. Part of me, a small and not sonic part, wanted to hear that things were worse for him. I wasn't proud of that feeling, but we all have moments like that. So, how is he doing? I asked as casually as I could. Tina saw right through me. Wouldn't you like to know? You could just call and find out yourself, you know, she said with a meaningful look. Ha, I scoffed. The last time I did that, I was upset for days. A dinner party, really? I ask you, Tina, who goes to a dinner party as a single guy these days? My voice was sharper than I meant it to be. I realized I was angrier than I thought, considering everything that had happened lately. Who said he was single? Tina asked with a teasing smile. I was surprised and she could see it. She chuckled and added, I'm just joking with you, sis. But that didn't really deny what she had said. I narrowed my eyes and was ready to argue when she suddenly dropped her teasing tone and leaned in, her eyes sparkling. Let me get this straight. You left your husband because you thought his job, his personality, and really everything about him wasn't good enough for you, right? I was taken aback by her words, the annoyance fading and replaced by anger at her assumption. I quickly responded, That's not it at all. Of course not. I just wanted different things, I replied. It was what I had told others, and most people nodded in understanding. After all, who hasn't felt that way about their partner sometimes? What different things? Tina pressed. What do you mean? I responded. What did he want that you didn't? Or what did you want that he didn't? You made that claim. Now explain it. I hesitated, searching for the right words. Honestly, that statement had been enough for everyone else, and I had never thought much more about it. But Tina clearly wanted more details. I paused to gather my thoughts. Jeff wasn't very driven. Just look at his job. Is that a good job for a man? I mean, for someone working toward a PhD? He has the PhD, Jan. He got it 6 months ago. I was shocked again. Oh, I didn't know, I mumbled. He didn't mention it, and neither did the kids. Well, he has. And since you question whether that job is right for a grown man, who do you think it is right for? Who should be making toys that shape the next generation who will decide what happens in our future? If Jeff shouldn't be doing it, then who is the right person? Thinking about it that way made me feel different. I said, feeling uneasy. Isn't it more accurate to say it's not a job for your husband? She asked, almost playfully. This is what Tina does. She takes what you say and twists it until it seems completely different from what you meant. I sighed. Nothing ever changes. Of course not, I said sharply. Don't be silly. And yet, you just called it a demeaning job. Face it, Jan, you are a bit of a snob. You might dress it up, but you are, you know. I leaned back and crossed my arms, my way of handling a stubborn Tina. She tried to hold back a smile, then started again. So, things weren't good, right? You were frustrated, tired, ready to give up, right? That's putting it mildly, I replied quietly. Okay, so what did you actually do about it, Jan? What actions did you take? Besides getting angrier and dreaming of your own little kingdom, what did you do to cross that gap only you could see? That really hit me. I had never thought about it like that. Tina noticed my reaction and kept pressing. Isn't it true that you did nothing, Jan? You just sat there upset that he wasn't good enough for you and didn't do anything to fix that gap? When he tried, all you did was get angry because you thought he was looking down on you. Those are his words, by the way. What did you do, Janny? Things were heating up. I could tell Tina was starting to get upset, too. Let me tell you what you did, Jan. You left. You walked out on your family, went off to your little dream place, and didn't even try. You just got more frustrated that your family didn't match up to your impossible ideas. Never mind that your husband loved you. Never mind that your kids loved your family. Never mind that your husband just wanted what was best for you, even letting you go if that's what you needed to be happy. Her tone had changed, and when she finished, we both noticed people around us starting to look over, some with curious or angry expressions. The truth is, Jan, all your husband did was try to make you happy, and it wasn't enough for you, and you did nothing to try to give back. She whispered that last part. No, I said quietly. It wasn't like that. Things just weren't working out for either of us. I had to leave. It was the right choice for both of us. Was it, Jan? Did you ever even ask Jeff how he felt? He was confused by your quick change. He could see it was coming, but didn't understand why. He didn't know what to do to make you happy, and you didn't help him at all, did you? Like always, the first thing that came to mind was, what about Jan? I'd like to say this is something new, but really you've always been like this since you were a kid. Look, Tina, I said, feeling defensive. It's easy for you to say that, but you weren't here. I pointed at her to emphasize my point. You weren't here. You were off somewhere sailing with your soulmate. I rolled my eyes to make my feelings clear. I was here. I was in that relationship every single day. I was feeling trapped. I needed to break free or I would have lost it. You need to understand. I was part pleading, part demanding her understanding. Tina wasn't having any of it. Oh, come on. Poor Jan feels like life hasn't given her what she thinks she deserves, so it's everyone else's fault. Let me ask you this, Jan. Since you left, how has that worked out for you? Has it been what you expected? Have those relationships filled the gaps you had with Jeff? She didn't even wait for my response, which was probably for the best, since there was no way I could answer positively. I knew that deep down. And now it can't be Jeff's fault, can it? He's not in your life anymore. There's only you. So what does that say, Jan? It can't just be that bad relationship you left, the one where someone thought you were perfect and you were screaming inside? I felt a rush of fear. The truth was, she was right. I had thought about it before, but always found reasons to blame others. It wasn't my fault Tom disliked kids, or that Damon gained pleasure from being with me, or that Tony didn't want anything serious. The truth is, Jan, the only common factor in all these failed relationships is you. She made her point and leaned back. At least she didn't look smug. She just stared at me closely as if waiting to see what I would do next. Listen, Tina, I know it's easy for you to come in here, fresh from vacation, but life here hasn't been easy. Dating is tough. You have to meet a lot of people to find the right one. At least I'm trying. You can watch from the sidelines, but I'm out there, putting myself out there. Tina looked frustrated, and it showed on her face. Look at you, Jan. This is exactly what I mean. Instead of really hearing me, you're just digging in, looking for more excuses. Now you're saying I shouldn't criticize because I'm not living your life. Well, you're right, I'm not. My marriage is still strong. Do you know why? Because unlike you, I see that it takes effort from both sides. I have to put in work, and so does Marv. With you, it's like you had 2 kids, found a job selling office space, and then suddenly decided you were done. Now get it together and make me happy. Dance for me. It feels like you just gave up. I bet you were upset inside, Jan. I really believe that, but I'm curious about what you were feeling. It's easy to get bored and unhappy, but most people don't take it out on their partners and suddenly disappear, leaving everything behind. The truth is, Jan, you're being very selfish, and you seem to want to shift the blame onto someone else. I sighed. She just didn't understand. I tried again. Shouldn't I be happy, Tina? Is that what this is about? I should have just accepted the role of housewife, watched my shows, joined the Parent-Teacher Association, and shopped for curtains. You know me better than that. I'm much more than that. You know I felt trapped in that marriage. Everything Jeff did drove me crazy. It was better for everyone that I left. You weren't there. You didn't see it. No, you're right, she quickly replied. I wasn't there, but Jeff was. Have you ever really talked to him about it? About how you felt then and how you feel now? I think Jeff knew how I felt when I left, I said with a smirk. Believe me, Tina, he understood. Tina looked frustrated. No, I don't mean shouting at him about how he was ruining your life. Anyone can do that. A child could do that. I mean really talked, with the benefit of time to reflect. She had a point. That had never happened. Now that she mentioned it, it was a good question. No, I admitted slowly. I don't know why. It just never happened. No, Tina replied, dismissing it. Well, he has thought about calling you more than once, but after the last argument you had, when you got really upset because he had friends over, did you know who was there? It was his support group for going through a divorce. He wasn't having a party with someone else. I know how your mind works, Jan. If there's a negative way to see something, you focus on that. He was just trying to find some understanding. And he couldn't come to you because you made it clear how you felt about him, his job, and all his little habits. It felt like you didn't want him to love you at all. She particularly emphasized the word love, making it clear how she felt. I was taken aback. Was I really that harsh? The truth is, you left him heartbroken, confused, but still trying to give you what you wanted, your freedom. Oh my goodness, Jan. That man cared for you so much that he let you go, so you could be free to follow your own dreams. And you never looked back, did you? You jumped from one difficult situation into another. Forget angels fear to tread. You charged straight into chaos, taking on everyone who crossed your path. She paused to catch her breath, but then continued her rant before I could say anything. And it has been one problem after another, hasn't it? How is that finding yourself journey going, Jan? Have you found yourself yet? You've had a series of partners, one of whom was harsh to your kids, another who was inappropriate, and the last one you believe is perfect basically told you that you demand too much attention. She laughed at that last comment, which made my frustration grow. The truth is, Jan, you already had what you wanted, yet you couldn't see it. Those sheets weren't clean enough for you, right? And of course, you made it everyone else's issue, just like when we were kids. It's never your fault, is it? It's always someone else's. She took another breath, and I was thinking of how to respond, wanting to say I deserved better in a nicer way. It sounded arrogant to say it the other way. But then she mumbled something that made it all explode. Wrong side of smart is right, she said quietly while picking up a glass of water. When I heard that, I lost control. How dare you! I shouted, hitting the table. I am not foolish! Tina, like everyone else nearby, stared at me in surprise. I realized I was making a scene, but in that moment of anger, everything felt overwhelming. That one comment from the past brought up all the hurtful words I had ever heard. What? Tina whispered, but I had started to vent. I am not foolish, I said more quietly, but still furious. Don't use that word like that, just like Mom would. She would be so proud of you right now. Jan, what the... she began, but I interrupted. I'm tired of hearing that from Mom. So I'm not as smart as you. Is that a problem? I am smart enough. I am good enough. I held tightly onto the sides of the table, and for some reason tears started to flow. Jan, Tina said softly, reaching out to take one of my hands and holding it firmly. I don't know what you mean by that, she replied with genuine concern in her eyes. I've heard that too often from Mom, I said through my tears. I am not foolish. She kept saying it. I am not. Jan, she said again, unable to understand. The wrong side of smart. That's what Mom would tell me. It just means the other side of being clever. Foolish. I know what it means. Tina looked at me in shock. She seemed surprised I couldn't understand why. It seemed clear to me. Jan, that's not what that means at all, she said firmly. What? I asked, wiping my eyes with a napkin. Jan, what she meant was not that you were foolish. Not at all. Remember the IQ tests we took? I remembered. We were 14 and 17. Mom had heard about this group for smart people called Mensa and made us take the intelligence test. It was a timed test with questions about shapes and patterns. At the time, it seemed pointless, but we did it because we were told to. You didn't say no to Mom and Dad. I shrugged at Tina. Yeah, so what? Mom sent in the results. Did you know you scored 13 points higher than I did? I stopped wiping my eyes. What? I had scored more than Tina? Saint Tina, the queen of smarts? That couldn't be. Tina nodded at me with a shy smile. Yeah, she didn't tell you because she knew you'd make a big deal out of it. I couldn't help but smile a little at that. She was right. I would have brought it up all the time if I'd known. Now that I did know, I was definitely going to keep that in mind for later. What Mom meant, Jan, is that you are the other kind of clever. The kind that knows she is clever and can explain away any feelings you have. If you are upset, you can think through why you feel that way and identify what caused it. In an argument, you're smart enough to come up with reasons why you are right and the other person is wrong. You have this level of cleverness that lets you blame others for how you feel. You listen just enough to find holes in the other person's argument, and then you counter it. And because you are smart, you excel at this. But you don't genuinely hear the other side. You only focus on proving your point. She took her hand off mine and had a sip of water. Basically, Mom was saying that you are clever enough to explain away any feeling without taking real responsibility. You make it hard for anyone to challenge you because you are so skilled at defending your position. Just look at your life with Jeff. You've spent all dinner trying to show me how tough it was. I believe you, Jan. I really do. I truly believe you felt overwhelmed there. She reached out and took my hand again. I was surprised to find myself actually listening, but I had to. There was something in what was being said that I needed to understand. The more I listened, the more I knew I couldn't stop. You were so focused on your feelings and blaming others that you missed the fact that you weren't doing your part either. It wasn't just about you. It was always about someone else not doing something you wanted. But what about what you did? You didn't even talk to Jeff before you lost your temper. But that was also his fault, right? You made excuses for how you felt, and deep down you knew you weren't being a good partner in the marriage. She leaned back with a sarcastic smile on her face. On top of that, your need to feel intellectually superior and your snobbish attitude only hurt things more. I bet you're sitting there trying to think of something to argue with me instead of reflecting on what I said. You're looking for ways to dismiss my words rather than seeing how they might be true. I didn't appreciate that much. But was there some truth to it? I usually wanted to argue, yet I understood part of what she meant. I was too close to see things clearly. Look at what happened after you left Jeff, Jan. You've been desperately searching for someone to make you happy. You thought you found someone, but it didn't work out. And you say that was his fault too, can't you see? The problem here is you. You expect others to make you happy, and you notice every time they don't. With some bad choices in men mixed in, well, here we are. She spread her hands, making her point. I just sat there, shocked, angry, and mostly stunned. Was I really this self-centered? I like to think of myself as smart. Was I really that unaware? If she was even half right, then I sat quietly, breathing, while Tina looked at me. I felt a sudden realization wash over me that knocked the wind out of my sails. This was who I was. This was how others saw me. It wasn't a nice picture, and in that moment, I didn't like myself either. It's hard to suddenly see the truth about yourself and realize it doesn't match how you think you are or how you believe you should be. It felt like finishing a movie only to find out you were the bad guy all along, too caught up in your own thoughts to notice. This realization was frightening. I couldn't help but wonder what I had said to others. What unkind actions had I overlooked? Was I really at fault for not being happy, for dating the wrong people and making poor choices? Oh my God. Images flashed in my mind, talking to Jeff and putting down his job, ignoring Drew, being rude to Maisie, and making one bad choice after another with men. Wow! Finally, Tina said, "Well, say something, sis. Let me know you still want to chat." I snapped back to reality, where thoughts raced through my mind. I focused on Tina and thought about her words. To my surprise, I laughed a little. I don't think telling you not to would stop you. No, she replied more seriously than I expected. It wouldn't. But you're my sister. Someone needs to get through to you. Well, I said after a moment of just feeling everything, there's a lot to think about. I truly didn't know what else to say. Yeah, Tina said uncertainly, her expression showing she worried she had gone too far. I recognized that look from her before. No, it's all okay, I reassured her with as much strength as I could muster. I wasn't going to break down now, not me, not now. Maybe you're right. I do have a lot to think about, I added firmly. We held each other's gaze for a few more minutes before Tina said, "Should I get the check then?" I could see her studying my face, trying to figure out how I was doing and what action to take next. And that was it. Understanding what Mom meant by her words and hearing all of Tina's tough feedback, especially after everything from the past couple of years, made moving forward difficult. I won't deny that. Suddenly seeing things clearly brought in a flood of light, and at times, I just wanted to close my eyes and hide away. Tina stayed for another 2 weeks. She visited often, but didn't stay long. She said she needed space, which I didn't fully understand. I guess being stuck on a boat in the Atlantic could make someone feel that way. For the next few days, I felt pretty low. Before leaving, Tina insisted on helping me find a therapist and even joined me for a couple of sessions to share her perspective as a sister. The truth was, she was right about it all. It only took a few sessions with the therapist for me to start seeing the obstacles I had put up around myself. I thought I was smart, but I began to understand what my mom and Tina meant when they said, the wrong side of smart. I could justify anything and make it seem like someone else's fault. Worse, I started to believe my own opinion about being smart. My ego led me to think I was better than others, so I was always right. Whenever I reacted with strong feelings, I would find a way to justify it. I thought my reactions were instinctive and therefore correct. It took several direct comments from the therapist and many discussions with Tina to reach this realization. I often fell back on my old smart defenses when challenged in those meetings, and it took time before I could look beyond my instinct to argue against what they were saying. The strange part was that once I understood what they meant, my whole view shifted. I could see my behavior from the outside, and it wasn't a nice picture. I nearly broke down several times and did so in private. I realized how I had treated Jeff, how I had overlooked him, made him feel small, and found fault with him, all to justify my own desires. It was a tough moment to understand that what I saw as my strengths were actually hurting others. I had convinced myself that I was right and dismissed other people's feelings as irrelevant or foolish. It was a hard truth to accept, and it came to me slowly at first, but when it hit hard. It felt like a tide rising, slowly at first, and then suddenly crashing over everything. The first wave came during a conversation with Tina when I realized that there was much more to this than I had thought. One clear moment was when the therapist asked why I decided to leave my marriage. I listed all the things Jeff did that bothered me, just like I had shared at the beginning. She listened and took notes, and then pointed out that all my reasons were negative. I hadn't bothered to think about the good things in our marriage. I was unhappy, searching for someone to blame for my feelings, and Jeff, being such a constant part of my life, easily became my target. I decided it was his fault and began to shape the facts to support that idea. I picked and chose which facts to highlight, making them seem more important than they really were. My own cleverness was helping me ignore my selfish actions. I never really compared the bad and good parts of our relationship. I only focused on the bad, twisting it into something worse because of my own pride. As my therapist said, there are people who refuse to see the truth, and she added, "It's even harder for those who believe there's no reason to look." Once I finally understood things, I had many apologies to make. I began my own version of a self-improvement plan, which had some good ideas, except for the part about needing a higher power. Maybe this was just my pride speaking, but I felt I didn't need anyone else to tell me when I had wronged someone and needed to make things right. At least now, I was seeing clearly. I wasn't thinking about any of my past partners, but rather about the kids, some friends, and especially Jeff. Jeff was a different story. When I reflected on everything, I realized many obvious things. Firstly, I had treated him so unfairly during our marriage that it was hard to believe. I have no idea how he managed to put up with all the negativity I directed at him. He must have really cared for me. Looking back at all my other dates, I noted that I always compared them to Jeff, and found that he was better in many ways. Even with Tony, who had chosen to leave, I had the choice to stay in my relationship with Jeff. One day, while listening to my dad's favorite band, the Rolling Stones, and hearing Mick Jagger's words, "You don't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need," everything clicked for me. I had what I truly needed, but my pride had blinded me to it. I didn't realize that I had it as good as I could have. Instead, I fixated on what I believed I deserved, and, looking back now, all I want is to rewind time. Not to exactly how it was before. I wasn't happy, and I doubt Jeff was either. The way things were wasn't right. There's no way he could have been happy with my actions. That doesn't mean he was perfect either. The truth is, I could have made more effort instead of acting like I was ready to leave. I could have tried to have a better conversation with him when he reached out to me. Instead of making fun of how he tried to connect, I could have listened to what he wanted to say and not just focused on his approach. Looking back, I see there were many things I could have done differently, or at least with a better attitude. From this new perspective, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I felt bad for leaving Jeff the way I did instead of trying to work things out. I regretted how I treated him afterward. I also felt guilty for not relating to my kids the way I wished to. I realized after some counseling that I just didn't know how to do it. It didn't come naturally, and when it wasn't there, I didn't know how to create it. So I did what I do best, avoided it. I made it their issue, convinced myself it wasn't my fault, and stayed away from situations that would show me the problem, which meant staying away from them. I wanted so badly to fix things. If only I could turn back time or at least try to rebuild something important. But I knew that wouldn't happen, and here is why. I was trying to do my own version of a popular recovery program's steps. Those steps are about taking responsibility, and I realized that I struggle with that. I thought, stop blaming some imaginary force and just deal with it yourself. So I knew I needed to reach out to him. When I called, he seemed surprised to hear from me. It had been so long since we had that close connection that I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. Once I recognized that, the guilt hit me again. How had I lost touch with my ex-husband's life? He hadn't hurt me or made me leave, even if he divorced me. He had good reasons for it, especially considering how I handled my departure. When I suggested he come over to talk, his first question was about the kids. He wanted to know if there was something important going on, which showed where his concerns lay. I assured him it had nothing to do with the kids, and then said the 4 words that usually create tension. We need to talk. He laughed softly and replied, No, I don't think we do. I think we did that when we were married. That almost brought me to tears again. I pushed through because I needed to do this. Not just for him, but for myself. If that sounds selfish, well, it's not like I was trying to hide that. No, I hesitated. You don't understand. We may not need to talk, but I do. There are things I need to say. I apologize. The last words were barely above a whisper. There was a quiet moment, then Jeff asked with concern, Jan, are you okay? Is everything all right? You sound different. Are you okay? Well, if you really want to know, Jeff, no, not really. I replied, trying to be honest without blaming him. Honestly, I've been thinking about things. I've realized some of my actions in a new way. I don't know, Jeff. I've made some big mistakes, and I just don't know where to start to make things better. Please, can you come by sometime? I have a lot to talk about, mostly about you. I was trying not to sound desperate, but I wasn't doing a good job of it. There was another pause. I could almost picture Jeff, deep in thought, reacting to this unusual message from me. It showed how caring he was that he responded with concern. Why had I ever underestimated that? More reason for me to feel bad about myself. Well, Jan, honestly, this isn't the best time. I have a lot going on. I'm heading out of town soon, plus there's a toy launch we are working on and some legal issues. Legal issues? I was surprised. This was Jeff, the toy maker, not a lawyer. Long story. Anyway, as I said, I'm leaving next week. Can you take care of Drew and Maisie while I'm gone? Maisie is pretty independent now, and Drew is quiet. You know him. Sure, I can do that. It'll be nice to have them, I said, meaning it. Immediately, I started thinking of fun activities we could do together, not just to pass time, but to bond. This was the first step in my plan to reconnect with the kids. But still, Jeff, when will you have time to talk? There are important things to discuss. Jeff chuckled. He recognized the reference from one of our favorite movies. I can meet on Wednesday afternoon. I'm going to the airport that evening, so I can't stay long. Today was Sunday, so that worked for me. I would have preferred a different time, but I wouldn't push it. That sounds good. What time, 3? Sure. See you then, Jan. Take care. That was settled. Now what should I wear? And what on earth should I say that gets my feelings across without making me sound foolish? More importantly, what was I really asking for? Acceptance? Understanding? A chance to explain? That was the main question. I had spent time reflecting on myself and my actions, and I knew there were things I needed to discuss with Jeff. But what did I really want from this conversation? I had left for reasons that might not have been justified, and I knew I played a big role in how things turned out. But what outcome was I hoping for? Did I want to rebuild our relationship? Was that even possible? Had Jeff moved on? Had I? Did I want to date him? Just be friends? What was I thinking? I honestly didn't know. I had seen the good in the relationship we had before I messed it up, but Jeff wasn't perfect. Would trying to build that again lead to the same end? Was he really what I wanted? Or was I just looking back at the relationship with rose-colored glasses because I realized how much I had hurt it in the first place? Sometimes, as Tina used to say when we were younger, I wished I could just be carefree and happy. Overthinking, or paralysis by analysis, as one of my college teachers called it, can ruin any good choice. But I couldn't help it. I didn't want to make another mistake by moving forward without considering my feelings. I wanted to make the right choice for the right reasons. It was surprisingly Tina who offered the answer on her last visit before she returned to Washington. Stop overthinking. Just relax. Go enjoy yourself for a night and stop trying to force an outcome. That's part of your problem, Jan. You decide what you want and then try to make everything fit that idea. Just go with the flow this time. Accept whatever he has to offer and decide what you really want after that. Stop trying to plan life out and start seeing it as it unfolds. In short, dear sister, just let things happen. That's my sister Tina, a mix of wisdom and humor. She could write a book, and it would probably be better than those by other self-help authors I'd come across. So that's what I did. I got some snacks and spent one evening with Melissa, trying to unwind and enjoy myself. Given my lack of recent experience with this, it was quite fun. Melissa tried it for the first time and had a great time. I felt relaxed on Wednesday when the entry phone buzzed. Of course, that calm feeling vanished instantly. Oh well, easy come, easy go. I answered the video phone, saw it was Jeff, and unlocked the door. I rushed to the mirror by the door, decent outfit, check, hair, done, and makeup. It wasn't perfect, but it was okay. I was as ready as I could be. When he knocked, I opened the door. There he was, looking both the same and much better than I remembered. I was surprised to see how much his hair had turned gray. It hadn't thinned out, but he looked more refined. He still had the same smile lines around his eyes and was clean-shaven, which meant he had made an effort. That made me feel good. He had the same bright gray eyes that first caught my attention at the restaurant where he was having dinner with a colleague. He sat at a table across from me, and I couldn't look away once I noticed him. His eyes were so clear and intense it felt like he was letting me see into his soul. My dinner partner, a date that wasn't going anywhere, had to remind me that I wasn't there for this intriguing stranger. "Do I look okay?" he asked with a friendly smile. Oh boy, it nearly made me weak. It reminded me of how he'd ask that when we were getting ready to go out. He'd put on his clothes and come to me for my opinion. "Do I look okay?" he'd say, and I would always find something for him to change. It became a fun little game between us. One time, it was even his choice of socks. I smiled softly and said, "For once, yes, definitely. Come on in." He stepped inside. Jeff had only been here once before during a tough night with Tom, and he hadn't really seen the place since he was preoccupied then. He walked around, looking at the photos on the wall of him and the kids. I wasn't hiding my past. It was part of my life, and I wanted to remember and celebrate it. I stayed in the kitchen and called out to him to ask what he wanted to drink. I almost joked, coffee, tea, or me, but stopped myself. We weren't together anymore. "Just coffee," he replied, looking out of the big bay window. Coffee? Wait, when did that happen? He had always disliked it. Did I miss something important? I knew I had been wrapped up in my own world lately, but this felt surprising. I brought him a cup, and he took it while still gazing out the window. "Wow, nice view. I see why you like this place," he said, sounding relaxed. Looking at the coffee and then at me, he grinned and said, "Yeah, got a taste for it. Had a good mentor." He seemed more at ease now, much more than I felt. This was new for him, and it suited him. We stood there for a moment, gazing out over Bellevue, taking in the trees and the distant buildings of Seattle. Eventually, he turned toward me just as I got ready to speak. We both paused, looked at each other, and laughed. In that moment, I realized what I truly wanted. No, what I needed. I needed this man. I needed him in my life, and I wanted to be in his. I wanted to wake up next to him in the morning and tease him about his snoring. I needed him to ask me, "Do I look okay?" So I could playfully suggest some changes, which he would do because he cared about me. I needed to feel his warmth and love, and I appreciated how simply he would try to express his feelings. I missed the way he used to look at me. I wanted him to kiss me so I could kiss him back, just like when we first met. Oh my goodness, I felt so lightheaded. "Let's sit down," I suggested to ease the moment. He checked his watch and replied, "Sure." "Do you have somewhere to be?" I asked. He put his cup down on the table and shrugged. "I need to be at the airport in a few hours. I have to give a statement in Boston, then I'm off on a trip." He didn't give more details about the trip, and I didn't ask, although I was interested. "Yeah, you mentioned a lawsuit. What's happening?" I wanted to know. He shrugged again. "It's complicated. We are suing a group in Boston for taking an idea I gave them a while back. They are making a lot of money from it, even though we created it. We proposed it to them a year ago, and they said thank you, ended our agreement, and then went ahead with it completely. So yeah, we are suing. It's not really my style, as you know, he said dryly. But the other partners at the consultancy are really pushing for it, and honestly, I'm okay with it. It would be nice to have something saved for retirement. Boston. Wait a minute. Hey, is this about that uncle's family project? I asked, now very curious. I remembered an article I had read where I wondered if he was involved. He looked at me in surprise. Yeah, it is. I designed that years ago, and it's been on our list of proposals for a while. When we work with companies, they often ask us for a list of suggestions we think they should create. This Boston group requested the list, we gave it to them, and next thing we knew, it was out in the world. I called it Grandma's House. But it's the same idea. Our lawyers say it's a solid case. We're not even trying to get back the rights since, honestly, they've done a great job bringing it to life. Better than we could, really. The plan is to leave it with them and just take half of their profits. Think of it as a partnership, so to speak. It should be worth something. I'm really happy for you, I said with a smile, and I truly meant it. This was wonderful. Finally, he would get some recognition. Even from me, someone who should have respected him all along. Now he would finally receive the respect he deserved, and I was very pleased for him. Other people would see him the way I did now, and that was good. He nodded, and we sat there sipping coffee and looking at each other while I built up my courage. It was now or never. So you're probably wondering why I asked you here. He gave me that familiar crooked smile. Yeah, so some things happened recently. I, met someone. I noticed him tense up, so I quickly corrected what he might be thinking. Oh, it's not going anywhere. The guy made that clear. He said I'm high maintenance, if you can believe that. I tried to lighten the mood with a joke. Strangely enough, I can, he replied, smiling because he understood my humor. Anyway, I continued, pushing forward, Tina came to visit, as you probably know. He nodded. I understand she found me through you, so thanks for that. I was feeling down and I kind of took it out on her. To make a long story short, you know how Tina is. She helped me see a few things clearly. I realized that my behavior was not great. Jeff leaned back and opened his arms wide, a classic gesture of, go ahead, I'm listening. I know this is hard for you to say, Jan. I have to say I'm impressed. This is not the conversation I expected. I wouldn't have guessed you would take this route. You were always a bit too smart for your own good, he said. I flinched. Too smart for your own good was just another way of saying I had made some poor choices, and he was right. Yes, I can't argue with that. After Tina helped me see things differently, I've been seeing a therapist to understand my own behavior better. I'm really working on improving myself. Jeff laughed, a genuine laugh. I can't picture you giving up control to a higher power, Jan. That wasn't your style. It was blunt, but true. Yeah, I replied, looking down. Fair enough. Anyway, the reason I asked you here? To make amends, he guessed. Yes, partly. I need to apologize for how I acted. My behavior, especially towards the end, was more about creating a situation I felt I had to escape than it was about anything you did wrong. I see that now. Of course, things weren't perfect between us. I have to let you know that you aren't without faults either. I smiled at him to show I wasn't blaming him, and he smiled back, acknowledging he understood. The truth is, instead of talking it out, I just took the I know best approach, and you ended up suffering for it. I'm really sorry about that. I was difficult, and you just stood there and took it, and I walked away. I walked away from the most important thing in my life, and now I feel that loss. Jeff leaned forward and clasped his hands, resting his elbows on his thighs and looking closely at me. I can see you've changed, Jan, he said slowly, searching for the right words. But the problem is, you had to break what you call the best thing to realize it was truly the best. I'm glad you can see what we had, but that realization comes at the cost of our relationship. I just stared at him, feeling tears rolling down my cheeks. It was now or never. What if it didn't have to be this way? I asked softly, looking deep into his kind, gray eyes. I'm sorry, he replied, clearly confused, leaning back a little. What if it didn't have to be? I repeated. What if we could, I don't know, start dating again? See where it leads? Just be together without any pressure or expectations? The thing is, Jeff, I've been out there and it's tough. I didn't see that you were what I really needed until now. I'm asking for another chance. Just a chance. I'm not asking to rush into anything or be exclusive if you don't want that. I just want a chance. I need a chance." Jeff looked at me, and for once I couldn't read his expression at all. His face seemed blank. This wasn't his usual serious look. It was just blank. "So let me get this straight, January," he said. "You left me in a difficult way, went out into the world, met all kinds of people, and now you've realized that what we had was better than what's out there, so now you want to come back. Is that it? I'm just the option you're returning to?" It seemed like he was serious after all. "No!" I exclaimed, feeling desperate. "You were never just an option. You are the only one. I messed up, not you. This is not me being arrogant and expecting you to take me back because I can't handle the world. This is me truly asking for your understanding because I made a mistake. And I need you. I need your support because it's my only hope. Yes, I made a big mistake and I'll live with that. But you are the better person. You've always been the better person. I think deep down, I've always known that, which is why I took our relationship for granted. This is not about you being second best. This is about you being the best, just as you have always been. Please understand that. I'm begging you." Once again, I couldn't read his face, searching his eyes for a sign of what he was feeling. I saw him bite his lip. Was that a good sign or not? I desperately needed him to understand. I was asking because I had truly messed up, and I was willing to take responsibility for it. I really had to make him see that. Finally, he sighed. "January, I can tell you feel sorry for what happened. This is a different side of you that I haven't seen before. We've known each other for a long time, and I usually think I understand you, but oh no. The truth is, January, I am married." "What?" I couldn't believe what I heard. I was completely shocked. "What?" I stammered, taken aback. "Look, January, when you left, you took away a lot of my self-respect. That situation with Tom didn't help either. I was upset with what happened between us for a long time. The kids felt it too, to be honest, and you just seemed to move on with your life, not caring about us. I struggled to get through my days. At one point, I had to rely on medication just to function. How did I not know this? It was worse than I imagined." "I'm really sorry, Jeff. I had no idea," I said, tears rolling down my cheeks. "Well, you wouldn't know. You left and got caught up in your own world. I told the kids not to mention anything about you, and I did the same. It was really tough for me. But eventually I started to recover." I just sat there, captivated by what he was saying. I ended up seeing a doctor who suggested I try working out. So I decided to give it a shot and started going to the gym. That was challenging too. Later I found a running group and met Amber. Amber. I didn't like her already. She has 2 kids like me and went through a tough time when her husband developed a drug problem. We supported each other, and one thing led to another. This must be what Tina meant when she said he wasn't alone back during dinner. She probably knew. But maybe it was better she didn't tell me. I had enough going on. "And you are?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Yes, we got married 2 weeks ago," he said, his face full of concern. "Our trip to Boston is on the way to the Bahamas for our honeymoon." He looked genuinely uncomfortable sharing this with me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. In all my thoughts, I never expected this outcome. It felt like yet another example of how I misunderstood the situation. Tina's advice to relax and enjoy life made more sense now. Wait, he wasn't wearing a wedding ring. I would have caught that. He noticed me looking and said, "It's being resized. Amber ordered the wrong size, and it's made from a meteorite, so resizing it is tricky." He shrugged slightly. "She makes you happy?" I asked quietly, unsure of what else to say. He nodded. "She does. Look, Jan, I'm really sorry to bring this up now, especially since I need to get to the airport. Since you've been so honest with me, I have to be honest too. I truly appreciate your apology. It means a lot to me, more than you might think. But I feel like the chance for us has closed now, and honestly, I think you can only blame yourself for that. I don't want to cut you out of my life. You will always be the mother of our kids, and we will always be connected. When I'm back, let's have dinner, and you can meet Amber. Please, just take care of our kids. I think Maisie is on her way. Drew and she were arranging a ride from her boyfriend when I left. He checked his watch again and then shifted on the couch to stand. I really have to go, Jan. Are you going to be okay?" His worry was clear. I'm really uncomfortable leaving after what I just said, especially after your words. I sighed. This was not how I wanted things to go, not at all. I had shared my feelings, and he had accepted them, which surprised me. But still, everything felt broken. All my hopes were lost. The things I tried to avoid had turned into what I wanted most, and now that was gone, for good. And as he said, I could only blame myself. I tried to stay strong. I smiled and said, "No, I'm fine, you know me. I always get through tough times. And if I don't, I'll just be there for everyone else." It was a weak joke, and we both knew it, but it showed him I wasn't about to break down, at least not right now. When the kids arrived, I would have them to focus on and lean on. "You sure?" he asked again. "Yes. Go take care of your things. You have important work ahead. I'll handle the kids. It's okay. Go enjoy yourself." More shallow words, but it was all I could offer at that moment. As he got up to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at me. "Jan," he said, "I'm sorry for everything that happened. I wish you could have found what you wanted sooner. I wish things were easier. I'm sorry you had to hear it this way. Please take care of yourself. If it helps, I've forgiven you for all the little things we both did. I've moved on, and I really hope you can too. I thought you were already doing that, but I'm sure this won't take you long to get past. You're strong. You'll be here for a long time." His words were kind, and they both warmed and hurt my heart at the same time. "Go," I said gently. "People are waiting for you. Enjoy yourself, and we'll talk when you get home." He nodded, and I did feel a little better. I didn't get exactly what I was hoping for, but maybe I got what I needed, just like Dad used to sing about. After he left, I sat down, had a glass of juice, texted the kids to see when they would visit, and started planning a trip to the Science Fiction Museum downtown. I knew Drew would really enjoy it. Life is meant to be lived, and I wanted to embrace it. My ex certainly was, and I couldn't hold that against him. I just wished his new partner was kinder to him than I had been. But still, Amber. What kind of name is that? Is she really that young? Hey, everyone. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.